Welcome to my channel. Here, I don't just speak, but I invite you to think. Throughout my videos, I've questioned the deepest held beliefs, from philosophy, the dynamics of religion and faith, to personal identity. I ventured into the controversial because I know that only in honest, critical confrontation do we grow. My voice is a search for truth, unafraid of what is difficult. If you join this community today, you don't just watch, but you engage. Together, we open the door to a courageous dialogue, one that transforms us. Subscribe, share, and let's keep questioning, growing, and seeking truth together. All right, everybody, welcome to the channel. That was my first attempt at making an intro. So your feedback is always appreciated on this kind of stuff. I'm trying to kind of make the channel a little bit more professional. I'm pretty pleased with the way that went. I may do some kind of like graphics or something and change out that welcome screen. I don't know. We'll mess with it as time goes on. But I just want to, I'm going to be bringing up our special guest, A's Philosophy, here in just a second. We're going to be going over this is going to be part 2 of an ongoing conversation that we're having on free will versus determinism. And if you caught the last episode, it was fantastic. We had a really great conversation, and I'm really excited about continuing this. There was a lot left on the table, and we'll get into that. So we're going to try to shore some of that up. Before I get started with that, I want to thank everybody who's supporting this channel. The channel is continuing to grow at a fast rate. I'm over 180 subscribers now. I can't believe it. And I think we are, like I said, around 16,000 views or so on the videos. People are sharing the videos, and I really, really appreciate the support that we've got going for this effort. And so I'm going to bring A's up here, if I could figure out how to do this. You guys know I'm really bad at all this technology. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just give A's a quick chance to introduce himself for anybody who wasn't here for the first episode. And I will link that episode to the description. I'll put a link to A's channel in the description. A lot of this I have to do after the video posts, but I will get that done right away. So A's, before we continue, why don't you take an opportunity and just introduce yourself to the audience?
Appreciate that, Objective Ethics. Yeah, I'm A from the A's Philosophy YouTube channel. I believe this is the 3rd time I've been on Objective X channel, so I'll keep my introduction brief. But I would just, basically direct people to my channel. It's A's Philosophy. You can probably just type it in and type that in, and it's probably the first thing that pops up. You can look for the symbol there, and you can look at my. I'm a Christian. I've been accused of holding different views, unorthodox views, but that's because I've done a research and come to different conclusions than traditional Christianity. So a lot of my channel is about my research into what constitutes true Christianity, but I also delve into other topics, talking about the idea of theism versus atheism, or there not being a God versus a God existing, which is more rational, which is more likely. I have videos on my channel about the intelligent design versus evolution question, and all kinds of topics. A lot of my channel is open discussions. People are welcome to join. I try to host at least one per week, and skeptics and atheists and people who question religion are welcome to join, and we can debate things and discuss things and have conversations about that. So I'll just leave it there. And yeah, just go to my channel and try to look at what I'm all about, look at the video titles, and I have a lot of different types of content. So I'll just leave it there for now.
All right, I really appreciate that introduction, A's. I think I did this backwards. I've got this notepad up, and I think what I want to do is actually remove this and bring up the YouTube.
Well, bring yourself back first. Looks like maybe that might be a good idea.
Yeah,
so people can see that there's. Well, I shouldn't tell you how to run your own
That's
channel.
Good thinking. Yeah, that's good thinking. Here, let me. Here, this is what I want to do. And that's not what I want to do either. What I want to do here. There it is. Okay. Let me add this. share screen, and let me bring up my YouTube. Sorry about this. It takes.
No, you're good. You're good.
Yeah,
No, yeah, there's a.
okay. Okay, here we. This is what I'm looking for. Okay, so what I think is going to be helpful for anybody, first of all, for people who didn't catch the first episode, and I think for Ace and I both as a refresher, I'm going to just play the closing remarks that we both made at the end of that debate to kind of give us a starting off point. Because when Ace and I, when we got into this, we really started to unpack. I mean, there's so much that goes into the conversation of free will versus determinism. We ended up talking about consciousness, the mind body problem. It seemed like we might have been using different ideas of what free will even is. So we're going to try to sort out some of that before we continue the conversation into the ethics and morality and how that plays a part, because I think that's a really important part of the conversation I want to get into. But we need to kind of keep this somewhat linear, because we're just leaving a lot of unanswered questions on the table. So adding more questions doesn't seem like it's the best idea. So let me play this. And if I go full screen on this, will it actually? Yes. Okay. So that when he returns, we have kind of a starting off point. So we're going to put a pin in that. So before I do that, and then I also want to give Ace a chance to basically have a final closing remarks, introduce his channel, talk about whatever he thinks about whatever. Just give him a chance to step out, but say something before he does. And Dr. Dan Norton has joined us, and he talks about free will quite a bit from Ayn Rand's perspective. I don't know how much of the show you've caught, Dr. Norton, or do you want to speak to Ace while he's still here? Because I should turn the floor to you because Ace is getting ready to leave. Or do you want to just join the conversation organically? How do you want to do that?
The only part I heard was the opening statements, and then I just skipped forward to the end right now. So
you missed a lot.
There's quite a bit. We're quite a bit into it. So okay, then in that case, why don't you hold tight, and then let me go ahead and just give a little bit of pushback on what's being said here from the consciousness standpoint, and also just kind of give a couple closing remarks for you to chew on, Ace, and then you and I will reach out to each other via email and set up a part 2 of this. What I'd like to do, just to push back on the consciousness thing, one, I don't think that we really came to a definition of what we're talking about. We threw a lot of ideas out there about what consciousness is, but I didn't actually hear anybody, like I didn't hear you guys come to an agreement of, oh yeah, that's what consciousness is. You know, is it abstraction? Is it self-reflection? Is it like Scott was talking about the qualia? Excuse me, I had to clear my throat. Is it the qualia? You know, what does it feel like to sit next to a warm fire? What's the redness of red? This kind of thing. Is that what we're talking about? Are we talking about being able to interact with our environment at the fundamental level? So I never did hear that parsed out. I'm not sure if you guys did that and I missed it, but I think that was actually really important. So next time, maybe we'll have to get into what we're really talking about here and all come to some kind of agreement on it, because otherwise I do feel like to a certain degree we might be talking past each other. The other thing I'd like to say is that I feel like we're conflating things a little bit, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful or dismissive, but I've been trying to really follow everybody's talking points. And I feel like, you know, the analogy of the light bulb to the brain, the way the neuron network is set up with the brain, and try to extrapolate that to a light bulb analogy. I don't think that's really a fair analogy. I think if we're going to be more analogous, we would look at something like a computer or something. I was trying to kind of mention that. And the other problem we're going to have here is that no matter what analogy we come up with, the whole thing about an analogous relationship is you're not talking about the thing you're talking about, right? Otherwise it would be that thing. So no analogy is really going to be perfect. So we should try to find the closest analogous relationship that we can, just for the fairness sake, in my opinion, and not throw, you know, the light bulb out. I think that's almost kind of a straw man argument. You know, let's tie it together. Straw man might not be fair, but it seems like we could come up with a lot better analogies to the neural network of the brain, as opposed to, you know, comparing that to a light bulb. The other thing I'd like to say, so that might help with some of the talking past each other if we had a better analogy. The other thing I'd like to mention here for you to think about for our next conversation is a couple things. Well, just to tie on the conversation thing, as far as consciousness being emergent, I think a little bit of what Chris was talking about here, if I understood him correctly, and I'm in agreement with him, is that we do have empirical studies on that affect consciousness, and we do this by affecting the brain. We've never seen consciousness arrive. And again, I'm using my definition of consciousness, and I'm assuming what you guys are meaning by consciousness, but we haven't really defined that. So take that for granted. But if I think we're all talking about some similarities, we can affect consciousness by affecting the brain. We don't see rocks acting conscious. We don't see inanimate objects displaying any kind of consciousness, but we can affect consciousness in any animal that has a fairly developed brain, right? But it takes a brain to affect consciousness, unless we're talking about simply reacting with the environment. Then we have to really step back from the conversation and really think about what are we talking about with this consciousness thing? But we don't get abstraction. We don't get what it's like or experience or any of that stuff that ties into that at the most rudimentary level. I would say that one of the questions I had for you specifically more about that ties into free will itself is, do you, and you might be able to answer it now or I might think about it for later, but do you think that it's possible for us to decide what we are convinced by? Because I come from the position that we cannot make the decision as to what we find convincing. What decision-making process we have is what information we allow ourselves to be exposed to with what is reasonable. Like I can choose to tune out my wife, but it's not going to be a good idea if I want to have a functional relationship with her, right? So we could decide to a certain degree, like what information we're going to expose ourselves to. If a person who denies a particular scientific claim only studies things that have nothing to do with that particular scientific claim, then they're really denying themselves access to information they might find convincing, right? But I don't think that they can control what actually convinces them. They can only control to a certain degree what information they expose themselves to. So if you think that you can hear something and make a conscious decision, yeah, I'm gonna be convinced by that, or I'm gonna reject that, that would be an interesting conversation that might tie into where we get with free will. So I threw a lot at you, and I know you're getting ready to head out of here. So why don't you have the floor, and you can make any closing remarks that you'd like to, and then whatever you want to do from there.
Yeah, excuse me. Unfortunately, a lot is going to have to be left on the table. So many questions, but again, this I think it was Dr. Norton. Hopefully we will be able to interact in future conversations. Unfortunately, you joined right before I left, but people based on their dispositions will reject the truth regardless of what facts are put before them. And if you're going to say that we can't choose what is convincing to us, then the whole atheist movement is going to have to just give up, because they're going to be, if people have religious beliefs, it's not based on what convinces them. It's based on these factors that are beyond their control. So what's the point of arguing with people? But the key is that, this is why you can have two people in a room, present them the same facts, and they'll come to different conclusions regardless of what the facts are. The question is, what are the facts? Because even if they come to different beliefs about what's true, the truth is still there. Okay, so there is a truth. So one of them could be correct. And that's the whole point of these conversations, is figuring out what is the truth, the ultimate truth, beyond our individual perspectives, because there is a reality beyond us, and human beliefs do not, bear upon that or affect it. It is what it is. So that's what I would say to that, is that yes, we do based on our emotional preferences, humans in general will reject facts and truth if it is something that makes us uncomfortable. We do this all the time. And the question is, how do we solve that problem? It's not easily solved because it comes from within the agency of the person. This is why free will is so important. We have to be using our free will to the maximum extent. And in my opinion, we should it's always in our best interest to believe what's true, even if it hurts our feelings, even if it makes us feel uncomfortable. That's why, even though I'm a theist, if someone were to demonstrate to me the absolute truth that God does not exist, then I would like to think that I would change my mind and believe it, because that's what's true. It doesn't matter how I feel about it. If someone showed me that Jesus is a myth, I would have to believe that. I don't believe that anyone has proven mythicism, but if someone did come along and do it, I would have to abandon Christianity even though it would probably hurt my feelings a little bit because I'm a Christian. But yeah, as far as the free will agency discussion, there's just so much. And again, I'm going to close in the next couple of minutes here to let the conversation continue. But just I see another 2 minutes here, 1 minute. I really feel like there was a lot of talking past each other, not intentionally so, but there definitely is room for a future conversation. And it wouldn't be a bad idea even to revisit a lot of the topics that were brought up during this conversation, because I feel like we still need to find a firm foundation. So I wouldn't be surprised if we, 3 or 4, maybe even 5 rounds before we start making progress. But that's fine with me, because these conversations take a long time and it takes a lot to work through them. I would just, when it comes to free will, again, go back to my example. You have an apple and an orange in front of you at a moment in time. Can you actually go one way or the other in a moment in time? The big question tonight we address is, can the materialist worldview account for a reality in which, yes, the answer is yes, you can go option A or option B at a moment in time, which would mean that at that moment in time, the future was indeterminate. In my opinion, materialism is a deterministic worldview. There's no other way to look at it. Another question that arose, the mind-body problem very frequently comes up. How you conceive of the mind, ask the question, what is the mind? What is it made of? What is this relation to consciousness? Yes, our mind, to answer the question of, we have experiments showing that, when you shock this part of the brain, it produces this kind of, that's because the consciousness is interpreting what's coming into its field from the human mind. It's connected to the human body. So if you affect there's an interaction there. There's an interaction going on. So if you do something to the brain, it's going to affect what is conscious. The consciousness is experiencing what's happening to the body. So if you affect the body, the consciousness is going to receive that, and it's going to affect the consciousness. So there's no problem there. There can be a dualism there. There can be an independent consciousness, and it also be impacted by what's happening with the physical body. This is the last question I'm going to ask. This is a question we can get to, and all these other questions are good ones. We can get to them in future conversations. If you want to believe in the materialist paradigm, you have to explain consciousness, but consciousness would therefore have to be explained in terms of material, in terms of matter. You really, so next time, let's try to figure out, if we go this way, when it comes to consciousness, and you're a materialist, whoever the materialist out there, what is the material that is the fundamental essence or building block of consciousness in the materialist paradigm? Because if you can't answer that, then we're starting to get into, well, materialism can't solve the problems of free will and what we observe. So I'll end it there. Thank you all.
Yeah, that was a great conversation, brother. It's always okay. So hopefully that helps everybody. I know it was helpful to me. It was writing down some notes as I was listening to both of us do that. So that kind of recaps. I think that was actually a pretty good summary of how the conversation went. Oh, let me get this off the screen. Can people even hear me when this is on the screen like that?
I can hear you, but you're gonna want to cancel share screen at this point.
People just can't see.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, let me bring up my document, my Word doc, so that we can jot down any notes to follow along with as needed here. Window. I think that's this. Okay, so do you have any remarks or comments that came to mind based on that summary?
Yeah, I do. I have a lot of thoughts, but if you want to direct and lead the questioning, because there were probably at least 10 points throughout that recap I could begin to address. So if you wanted to pick one and start there, or I could just
I got 6 written down myself.
Okay, 6. Okay, yeah. So maybe let's pick the one you think is the most interesting or most productive, and we can go with that.
Let's look. Okay, first of all, let me just ask a couple of easy ones. Consciousness. We talked about consciousness, and we talked about mind. Are we just basically conflating these ideas back and forth, or do these need to be independently defined for this conversation?
Well, here's the problem. We're dealing with the ignorance of the human experience. So what the mind and soul and spirit and consciousness actually are, I will just freely admit we don't actually know from a scientific, directly observable, perspective. I would put it that way. But we can reason that these things do exist at some level based on, arguments I made in the last conversation. Basically, I do believe that the mind, and in Greek, the word for mind is I probably shouldn't embarrass myself if I get this wrong, but I believe it's psyche. And psyche can mean so when we get that word psychology, the study of the mind. But that was also, I believe, and again, I could be wrong because I'm not a Greek scholar, but I believe that was also the word for soul, or maybe spirit. The idea is that your mind is a part of you that has substantive existence, that exists independently of the physical body in some way. I'm not going to claim we know exactly how, but it is there and it has a real existence. And I would probably say the mind and the soul or the spirit are the same thing. Basically, your body is just a marionette type of robot that just operates. The mind is kind of the actual man behind the scene, the Wizard of Oz type thing. It's the one that, actually generates the ideas in your head and it sends them to your brain. So if you think something, then it appears it starts in the mind. I want to move my arm to pick up a pen. So you think the thought, the mind knows how to do it, using the physical apparatus of your body. It sends the signal to the brain, which sends the signal to your nerves, down to your arms and your fingers, and it does all that. So your mind is basically, your body is just a meat robot being controlled by your mind in the my scheme. And now, what is consciousness? Consciousness is actually different from the mind. It's hard to explain. It's hard to really explain. But what the consciousness is the awareness of all of this that is taking place. So in my scheme, there is actually something, basically a pure awareness aspect of a being. I don't think this applies to just humans. It could apply to everything that is living. There are some people who believe that, bacteria, the idealists and the panpsychic people think that even rocks are conscious at a very incomprehensible level, far less than a human, but I'm not going to go that far. I will say that even single-celled bacteria appear to demonstrate some level of consciousness, and plants as well. So the idea that you need a brain to be conscious is challenged by that, but we're getting a little too far out. Basically, consciousness is the awareness of what the mind and the body are doing. So the mind is basically this is where your thoughts are being generated. That's the function of the mind. The body is responding to the thoughts in your mind on a number of levels. It's basically just being controlled by the mind. And your consciousness is basically just the sense of awareness that you have of all that's happening. So I guess that's what functions as definition for all of those terms.
I'm typing some notes out as you. I wonder if I should show this. I wonder if people can even see this. Can you read what I'm typing out here, or is that too small?
I can read it. If someone's on their cell phone, it might be too small for them to see, but okay. I'm using a laptop, so I can. It says mind/body : thoughts start in / with the mind.
Is that summarize? I'm trying to keep it brief and just summarize what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
And you've got consciousness. Sounds like just basically generalized as awareness. Is that right? Do you want to add anything to that? Okay.
We can leave it there for simplicity.
So yeah. So is the mind unaware? It has no awareness. It's
right. Yeah. If you didn't have consciousness, then the mind, you wouldn't be perceiving what it is the mind is doing and thinking. So I do think that consciousness. Now I'm willing to modify this if someone were to present a reason why I can't be right. A person could probably make the case that. You could just simplify it and do simply mind/body, and there shouldn't need to be a third category of consciousness. But I do.
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering is what function is consciousness really? Is consciousness sounds to me, based off of just these two descriptions here, that is as emergent from either the mind or the body or both.
Well, I think the consciousness is actually the most fundamental aspect of it, because you have to realize that it wouldn't be necessarily tripartite according to how I understand things, because the mind can be almost thought of as a second body, although it wouldn't have a physical form. It's like a second, almost part of yourself that is undetectable at this time with our modern technology, but it's there. But it's basically, it has a function, just like your body has a function. Your body's function is to do what the mind tells it to do, and the mind's function is to basically control the body, and also to basically run the mental aspect of everything that we do. Without the consciousness, these things can both exist, but you wouldn't be aware of what these things are doing. The consciousness basically is a part of our being that is basically attaches itself, its awareness to the body and the mind. Now, I'm absolutely willing to accept that perhaps consciousness is a function of the mind, but I think that there are some problems with that would resort to it needing to be a third aspect of an entity's being.
Okay, I just realized everybody's going to be able to see in real time how bad my spelling and typing is. That's horrible, but you guys will have to bear with me. Okay, so might be a function of the mind. Yeah, I'm not hearing a distinction. I mean, I'm hearing your words. I'm not understanding how we need a distinction. If we're going to, and I'm not granting any of this, I'm just trying to follow what you're saying here.
Right.
I'm not being mean or anything. I'm just saying I want to be fair and get clear what it is that I'm dealing with here from your position. So the mind, if I grant the mind, I don't see a need for consciousness. It just seems to me to be a function, as you would say, or I would say an emergent property, but of a mind-body combination. Because the mind isn't aware and the brain isn't aware. So now we have to insert consciousness to get awareness. Is that ultimately how it would have to work?
Right. So let's try to figure out why that's the case. Let's just take a simple atom. An atom by itself is not aware. But so if an atom was to be able to have experience, it would need its own consciousness. But that would be a second part. If you think about like, this is what we're going to with the brain and the neural networks and stuff. It doesn't work at a purely physical level, because no matter how many atoms, let's just say you start with one atom. Let's just, it could be a hydrogen atom, it could be any of the elements, whatever. Let's just start at that level. It's not conscious, because it's just an atom. It has protons, neutrons, and an electron. From a scientific standpoint, there's no basis for saying it has some sort of consciousness. Okay, well, let's say you add a second atom. It forms a molecule with a second atom. Okay, it's still not conscious. It's still not aware. It still has no basis. So let's just say you added a bazillion. We can continue this example and add as many atoms as I want, and they all form into the shape of a brain. And the question is, at what point does this thing, start to generate some sort of consciousness? Just thinking about it, ignoring the problem of what the consciousness is. Well, the materialists will say that it's these molecules, these atoms, will start, having electrical signals sent between each other, and then the electrical signals themselves are what are conscious. Well, we ask them, well, what are the electricity? Is just, or these synapses, or the neurotransmitters, whatever it is. These are also just molecules. They're all just molecules moving around in space. So, and the electricity is just photons moving around in a circuit. So how does this, from a mechanistic standpoint, generate consciousness? In my opinion, at no point, no matter how much complexity you add, and no matter what the configuration the atoms are in, there's no scientific base for saying, okay, this is where it's starting to generate consciousness. This is the consciousness. So you have to impose a consciousness on it. Okay, so there has to be an external consciousness that's aware of what's going on in this brain-shaped apparatus, and that interprets the things that are happening and is aware of what's going on there. So when you get to a being as complex as a human, the thing is, you got to realize the physical matter isn't enough. You need a mind. Well, a mind is what. So the mind is necessary because the physical matter isn't sufficient to direct its own agency, its own course. So the mind is what actually is the foundation of the basically the physical existence. And I'm using the word physical very loosely there. It's the non-conscious element of that is necessary to generate thoughts that are then sent to the brain of the organism, which cause it to do one thing or the other. So what is the mind? Well, the mind, in my opinion, is probably, again, this is not something I could demonstrate scientifically. I actually think the mind is made of a material that we cannot detect at this point in our scientific development. I think it's a form of energy or a form of some sort of substance. Like scientists say that there's this thing called dark matter in our energy that we can't detect directly, but we can see its effects on the universe. It could be made of something like that. Like we know the dark matter's there. We just don't know exactly what it is, and we can't study it because but we know based on its effects that it's something. And if people want to argue there's no such thing as dark matter, I'm willing to entertain that as well. But for now, most of the scientific community, astrologists say that there's stuff called dark matter. We don't know what it is, but it's out there and it's doing something. We just haven't figured out how to study it yet. I actually think the mind is kind of like that. I think it's probably just a substance that's indetectable at our current level of technology. And at some point, maybe we will be able to detect it. But anyways, the point of the reason the mind is necessary is because the body in itself is no different from a rock. It's just going to sit there and do nothing.
Let's not. We've got a lot.
Okay.
Said there,
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, that's okay. I don't want to be rude and cut you off, but I want to be able to, because we really jumped. I've tried to really hammer down on one point at a time before we move into the other, because I think there are a lot of problems with several things you brought up. I don't. Okay. The essence. So that was one of the notes that I wrote down from our previous conversation. Was we talked about essence, right? And we didn't use that word in our closing remarks, but I think you remember from our previous conversation, and you alluded to it here without using the word essence. The molecule, the atoms, the molecules, they don't have the properties or the essence of consciousness, so therefore you need to insert a fundamental consciousness. And I just don't see that need for that. I don't agree with that conclusion. So before we get into all that, let's really figure out. So we're in agreement that we cannot test or measure either consciousness. Yeah, well, I shouldn't say I'm not. Are you saying that we cannot test or measure consciousness or the mind? But is that what
we can't test or measure it in the same sense that we can measure the physical, the other physical aspects of
right. But we can test and measure the brain, and we can test and measure molecules and atoms, though, right?
Right, exactly.
Okay.
Right.
So if that's the case, we can in fact test and measure the effects of what people ascribe to a consciousness or a mind by affecting the brain. Would you agree with that?
Yes, we can do that. Absolutely. There's no question.
If that's the case, then it seems like both. Let me just put this here so make sure that I'm not just. Let's see. So both the mind and consciousness require a brain.
No, that's not correct. I would disagree with that. I would disagree with that statement.
Okay. So if we can't test the mind or consciousness independently, we cannot observe, detect, or test, how is it that they don't need a brain?
Well, I didn't say we couldn't observe it. I what I said was we can't we can't use physical apparat like technology to directly measure it and test it, but we can observe it basically. We can observe it directly through introspection.
We can observe which, consciousness or mind or both, or what?
The mind, and well, consciousness. Obviously, consciousness is a bait. We are aware, so we know we have a consciousness. But the question is, what is it? We can't settle that question scientifically right now because our technology just isn't there. In my question,
So,
in my opinion.
Well, okay, so let's just I think we can both agree that consciousness is simply awareness of the environment.
Right.
Oh, I can't spell. Environment of any organic organism, or only humans or animals, or what?
I would say it's almost enough to just define it as the capacity for a capacity for awareness of
But of by what? Would it be fair to say any organic organism, or do you not like that?
We can leave it there. Yeah.
Because do you think inorganic organisms have a consciousness?
Probably not. Probably not.
Okay. Because I would agree. I don't think consciousness is fundamental. I think there are some very interesting philosophical models regarding fundamental consciousness, non-dualism, idealism. I think those are all fascinating, but I think they all run into serious problems when you start to break them down. So I would say that if we look at consciousness as simply being environmental awareness, that seems to me to be scientifically and philosophically cohesive, right? I think both fields would agree with that. And so I think that's a pretty fair, we could at least use that as a common ground. And if we need to divert from that in the future, we always can. This is not written in stone, right? We can edit this. So, okay. So let's stick with that for consciousness. So if all we're talking about is consciousness being awareness, it may or may not be emergent. That's irrelevant at this point. Doesn't matter. So now what we can hammer down on is this mind-body situation here.
All right.
So this mind, am I correct? Then let's focusing just on the mind. We've got consciousness couched. The mind, would you agree that it is not observable directly or detectable in the same way that, like you said, antimatter is not observable or detectable?
Correct.
Okay, so what we're looking at effects of things, right, and then we're attributing that to mind, right?
Right. Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
So if that's where we're at, and I would agree with you there, that if there was a mind for the conversation, I would agree with you that we're looking at effects and we're trying to hammer that down. The brain, again, seems to be something that directly affects the mind. I don't see any evidence of any mind absent a brain. Do you?
Well, I already said that it does appear that the reason I disagree, there's no mind without a brain. One reason I would disagree is because it does appear that single-celled organisms are capable of making complex decisions. They're not just responding in a mechanistic way to what's going on in their environment. Scientists have seen since the 1800s that single-celled bacteria can solve problems logically. And because they're single cells, that means they don't have a brain, because brains require far more than one cell. So it appears to me that a brain is not necessary for a mind. That's one argument I would use. But
so when you say solve problems, you're talking about not analytically, but you're talking about basically responding to their environment.
No, because responding to your environment is different from solving a problem.
What kind of problems are they solving?
Like they can if there's an obstacle between them and their food source, they can figure out how to go around it and find the most optimal path and things like that. That's probably the most common way of, like, scientists will put little, obstacles, or they'll put them in like a little maze or something, and they'll see the little whatever the organism is, E. coli or paramecium. They'll see them, figuring out where to go, and it appears they can almost remember
things. Doesn't this mean basically, so to me, that sounds just like responding to its environment. They have a food source or an energy source that they identify, and that they recognize in their environment there's an obstacle between themselves and this food source, this energy source, or maybe it's obstacle in between themselves and a mate, and they will find a way around that obstacle based on whatever path shows to be open. But they're not sitting back and analyzing the situation and saying, okay, if I go left, what are my chances? If I go right, it's basically just responding to the options that are directly in front of it. And you can, it's extremely limited as to where this bacteria can go in order to solve this, quote unquote, solve this problem. It seems to me to just be a response to the environment. If you put water on a flat surface, and you plane, let's say, and you tilt that, the water's going to flow down, right? Always wants to find the lowest point. Well, then you put an obstacle in front of that water, it's no longer going to flow down. It's not thinking about any of this. It's simply the way physics work. And then if you put a hole in that obstacle, then it will find that hole if it's at the lowest point, because that's just simply responding to the environment. The physics itself, without any mind, without being organic whatsoever, it can respond to its environment. I see this bacteria in much the same way, except that the bacteria can move against gravity, perhaps, or something like that. So it has a little bit more of a capacity for mobility. So it's basically a step above an inanimate object, because it's animate, it can move, it's animated, right?
Right. So the difference is we're talking about physical determinacy versus when you say, I would never say that like water flowing in the necessary direction is responding to the environment, because in my responding what it's doing is it's following the laws of physics.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah,
so
right.
The bacteria, in my example, they're not following the laws of physics. They are going where they want to go. And you can almost imagine, instead of putting a single cell bacteria, let's both put something there we acknowledge doesn't have a mind. Like, let's say you have like a little grain of sand or something. You put it there and you say, okay, go to the food, or go to the whatever, go to the energy source, and you put a little obstacle. Obviously, it's absurd to think that a little grain of sand is going to make it. But the bacteria can do that. The single cell bacteria can do that. They can.
So you're asserting that because the organic organism can go find food, for example, or is animate, regardless of whatever it's doing that makes it animate, it's now animate versus inanimate. That is what the mind does. And so that you're attributing to the mind is just animation.
It's not just animation, but it's doing something specific that's goal oriented. Like a grain of sand can't have a goal it's trying to accomplish, but an organic being can. So the mind is what directs the activity of the physical part, the body of the organism. So
would you say that magnets have goals?
No, they don't, because they are that, again, we're talking about the fundamental laws of nature. The electromagnetism is one of the fundamental laws of nature. You have gravity, you have electromagnetism, you have the nuclear forces.
Right. So the magnet can attach itself and will move if there's a magnetic attraction. So there's motion, and that is perfectly explicable within the laws of physics. I don't understand why an organism moving, being animated to go find food, is not explained by the laws of physics. Why it wants to or desires to. I'm not understanding how you're
because sorry to interrupt you, but I guess you're asking the question is, what is the difference between the locomotion of the magnet going to where it's magnetized and the bacteria, whatever it is we're talking about?
Yeah, looking for food. Right.
And the reason there's a difference is because the magnet is operating according to mathematically definable mechanistic determined path. Like the strength of a magnet and how it's going to behave is calculable down to a very precise mathematical and exact level. It's going to do, if you set up some boundary conditions, the initial conditions for a magnet, and you can calculate the magnetic force and all that, and the size of whatever it is that's being moved, they'll always do exactly the same thing given the same boundary conditions, no matter what, because it's
so will the simple act.
No,
organism.
it won't. It won't, because the simple organism, it will basically move contrary to what the laws of physics would deem it move to accomplish a goal. So that's why, like, there's such a big difference between animate and inanimate objects. And animated beings can move contrary to what the laws of physics would dictate.
So you're saying that the animate organism, I just want trying to follow you here. I'm sorry for interrupting, but I really want to try to follow you. It sounds to me like you're saying that. Let me just put a new note here so we can keep up with this. I'm going to put a question mark here because you don't agree with that statement. But let me put here. So what I heard you say is animated organism. Oh, I can't spell organisms can violate the laws of physics. Because you said it will move, they can move contrary, operate, we'll even say, operate/move contrary to the laws of physics. Now, is that really your position?
Well, they can't violate the law at some level. Some aspect of the laws of physics are being violated. So I would probably almost tend to agree, have to agree. But yeah, I guess yeah, that is kind of what they're doing. I'm trying to think if there's a better way to look at it. But yeah, if you were to basically put a living organism in the same situation as an animate object and calculate the forces based on the initial conditions, yeah, there's some violation of the laws of physics going on at some level.
Okay, I can't. I would need some kind of a study or some evidence of that happening, because I would be willing to bet that if I Googled right now, can anything violate the laws of physics, the answer would be no. And so that's what science is going to tell us. So there's got to be. I mean, that's quite the statement. I'm trying to see if I can even just grant that for the purpose of the conversation, to try and find to move the conversation along, because I hate to come to an impasse this early, because we have so much still to unpack. But that seems to be a fundamental disagreement. I don't think anything can violate the laws of physics. And I'm not even a hard materialist. I'm a naturalist, but I'm not a hard materialist. But I just don't understand. Have we ever seen anything that we could test and prove that it's violated the laws of physics? Because we're asserting right now that the mind allows this to happen, but we've also admitted that we can't test the mind. So how are we, when do we observe the laws of physics actually, being violated? Can you think of an example that I might be unaware of? Because I'm not an expert.
Right. Yeah, anytime, basically.
And which law? Which law of physics?
Well, let's think about it this way. We talk about just matter. If we think about a situation where there's just inanimate objects, when you talk about the materialist paradigm and what science, quote unquote, would say, what science would have us believe is that because the laws of nature are mathematical, they're mathematically precise. There's no variation or mutability in them whatsoever. Any material object or aggregate of atoms or molecules, what it's going to do in a certain situation is always going to be mathematically definable into infinity, if you know enough about the everything that's interacting with itself in this reality, whatever reality you want to construct. The problem with that is anytime a sentient being makes a decision, it's introducing a situation where the laws of the deterministic laws of physics are breaking down at that point. So you could say anytime we observe anything, what we just call it making a decision and acting, then you are witnessing the materialistic understanding of how nature operates being violated, which means that the materialist paradigm can't explain it. So that's the whole point. You talk about scientists. The problem is this current scientific paradigm is the materialist paradigm. They say there's only matter and energy. The problem is we observe all the time, every day in our own experiences, that just cannot be true based on logical analysis. It's purely logical analysis that materialist paradigm is insufficient to explain what we are observing in an everyday level.
I'm not sure. So when we say logical argument, we have to be, and this is really not my expertise. I've got Deconverted Man in the chat. This would be something he'd be much more qualified to talk about. But there's two ways to look at the logical argument, because basically, I'll just use an anecdotal example here. I had a debate with a Christian fundamentalist who was determined to defend the global flood theory or myth, I'll call it, because that's what it is. It's a myth. There was no global flood. We have an abundance of evidence against it. The Exodus, I believe, is a myth as well. However, when it comes to the narrative of the Exodus, we don't have direct evidence that there was no Exodus. We have a lot of evidence as to why we can reject that claim, but there's no real direct evidence against it. When it comes to the global flood, we have an abundance of direct evidence against the global flood myth. And so I'm quite confident to say this never happened. I've been trying to get people to will debate me on this, and I can't find a single person who's willing to actually get online in public and defend this. A lot of keyboard warriors want to defend it, but nobody will actually get online and try and defend this global flood myth because it's so nonsensical. It's been so well refuted. The people who will claim that there was a global flood will say, well, look at this. We can make a logical argument. And they got onto Grok, and I had this happen where a guy got onto Grok and said, I want you to abandon all scientific theory, all scientific knowledge, all scientific claims, all known science, and using only logic and reason. Is the global flood myth or is the global flood story possible from Noah's flood? And Grok said, yeah, if you want to reject every single scientific method and only use logic and reason, yeah, you can claim that the global flood happened. Well, that's the problem with logic. As long as you don't introduce a logical contradiction, you can technically make a logical argument for unicorns existing. That doesn't get us anywhere useful, in my opinion. Now, logic is a useful tool, but only if you're going to use like formal or informal logical constraints, such as the first, second, and third laws of logic, law of identity, law of non-contradiction, and law of the excluded middle. If you can make an argument based on something like that, you have a lot more ground to work with. But even that doesn't get you necessarily to something that's empirical. In fact, it won't get you to something empirical. You need something empirically verified to get there. So at that point, we're just really just tossing out assumptions or assertions to try and define phenomenon that neither one of us seems qualified to actually say is one way or the other. And I'm not trying to be rude or dismissive, but this is, maybe I'm missing something. Now, is that unfair for me to say it like that?
You're talking about, I mean, it's not, I understand where you're coming from. I'm not saying it's the most, it's not the most problematic. But what I will say is that the difference between like the global flood and what I'm talking about is that the global flood, we're going to be talking about things that can't be directly observed in the current moment. But I do believe there's a difference, because what I'm talking about, I think, is something that, like, if you understand, the basic science about, how atoms behave, their properties, energy, photons and things like that, and what would be expected for them to do based on the materialist paradigm, and then you observe something different happening, which seems to be the introduction of choices and behaviors, then it becomes just directly apparent based on plain observations that there's an insufficiency there. So what I recommend people do is think about, imagine a universe where mind does not exist. There's no consciousness, there's no awareness, but there are, aggregations of material that are interacting with one another. None of this matter is going to be acting in a goal-oriented way. It's going to be acting according to the deterministic laws of physics, which are, again, mathematically calculable. If you put a little rock in the middle of another a circle of rocks, and let's just say the laws of physics, the wind is going to blow it in whichever direction. The wind is just atoms blowing around according to laws of physics, thermodynamics, and things like that. But let's say this circle of rocks has one rock that's painted blue, and you want that rock in the middle to go to the blue rock in this. Let's say there's like a circle of 100 rocks. For that rock to go directly to that blue rock, it has to be blown in the direction of that rock randomly, or if it has a mind, it can just choose the blue rock and move in that direction. Again, assuming it has the locomotive ability. So what I'm trying to show you is that if the laws of physics are all that's governing what's going on, nothing can act in a goal-oriented way, and you cannot survive as an organism if you cannot act in a goal-oriented way. So the very fact that we have organisms apparently observably acting in goal-oriented ways necessitates that the materialist paradigm cannot be true logically.
I don't see that as being an issue. The one issue I do see is, well, even if I grant the goal oriented, because when we talk about inanimate objects and we insert the word goal infers intention. And I don't think, like, does the magnet have a goal to be attracted, the positive to the negative? You know what I mean? Like there's no goal there. It's the laws of physics, right? So when we start to insert goal into other situations that could simply be determined again by laws of nature, which are run by the laws of physics, I don't think we need to. What's that?
Let me play with that. Let's say I want to take a vacation in France now, and I want to go next week. Me personally, are the laws of physics just going to randomly, take up my body and make sure I end up in Paris next to the Eiffel Tower? Almost certainly no. So for me to get to Paris, I have to have a goal. I have to make decisions. I have to figure out how to do that. I'm not going to, the physical apparatus of my body, the matter in my body, isn't just going to, according to the unguided laws of physics, end up in France next week. For me to do something like that, or anything like that, or I would say even, get out of bed in the morning, I have to have a goal to do that. And for me to have a goal, I have to have a mind. The matter itself isn't going to do it.
Well, I agree that you need a goal, or that I actually don't necessarily agree that you do need a goal. I think that you can set goals and take actions, but I don't think you need to have a goal to take an action. Your body will, because your body takes actions all the time that you don't set goals for. Your digestive system would be just one example. When you eat food, your goal is to stuff your pie hole, but when you digest your food and process it into energy, that's not your goal. That's completely independent of any goals that you have in mind. Your goal to go to France next week has absolutely no bearing on the fact that your body is going to digest your food, keep you breathing, maintain your balance when you're standing up without you thinking about it, so on and so forth. So I do believe we are agents. Agency means we set goals and take actions, but I'm glad you brought this up, because this does help tie this in. I don't want people to think that we've completely abandoned free will and determinism, because we are trying to get there. And this is a perfect example of that, where determinism comes into play, is that what caused you to set those goals? That's where the deterministic view and someone like Robert Sapolsky would come into play. Like what is it fundamentally that caused you to set the goal to go to Paris? And he would look at things like what did you expose yourself to media wise, or entertainment wise, or education wise? What was your upbringing? What kind of environment were you brought up with? Do you have ancestors in Paris? Do you have, an attraction to, art from Paris, or whatever it might be? So there you can, by many, many studies that are being done more and more, they can determine why you decided you wanted to go to Paris. One example of this would be, a judge makes a decision, quote unquote, right? When he hands out a sentence or convicts a criminal of something. And they have done studies on this, and a number of studies which I should probably post one. In fact, I could probably bring up a video of Sapolsky talking about it if we want to, but I could post the study, maybe links to it after this discussion. But they have done studies because the justice system is something where there's a lot of money and resources go into. So they put a lot of studies into this, and they discovered that if a criminal stands in front of a judge directly after lunch, directly after a judge has eaten a meal, he's significantly more likely, I don't remember the exact statistic, but significantly more likely to get a reduced sentence. Whereas if the judge is seeing somebody at the end of his day, after he's sat there and, had to sentence dozens of criminals and heard a bunch of bullshit excuses as to why people are crackheads and murderers and thieves, he's lost so much patience. He or she has lost so much patience. By the end of the day, they are significantly more likely to hand out a stronger sentence. And this is statistically provable. And studies have been over and over and over again. A loan, if you go to your banker to get a loan, if your banker has recently had a meal, you're significantly more likely to get your loan. And it has far less to do with other demographics than what people used to think, skin color, race. That does play a factor though. So I don't want to just completely abandon that, but it has so much to do with the chemicals that are in the person's body, their hormone levels, their serotonin levels, their testosterone levels. And that's just the immediate effect of those things. And you go back into their history, and you could now really look at how determinism has played a role into what we assume are just decisions being made at the moment. And we can see a clear linear path as to how that decision was made. So your goal of going to Paris, mathematically, if we knew every single thing about you, what you had to eat, how much sleep you had, what your exposure was, your education, we could probably determine why you chose that goal to go to Paris.
So I guess, is there a question? Are you just asking me to respond to that in general?
Yeah. What do you think about? Because you're talking about Paris, an inorganic organism couldn't do this.
Well, actually, everything you're saying, in my opinion, you have to understand the mind is the basis from which thoughts are generated. The mind will basically, when it's looking at the physical body, be aware of deficiencies, and it will get upset if it basically has its wants, its needs too. And if it senses that, basically all of this is happening, all of these decisions are happening in the mind. Okay. So if you hadn't eaten enough food, it's going to cause your mind to be aggravated and upset. Okay. And things like that. This is also with withdrawal. When drug addicts go through withdrawal, it's actually the mind that's causing all the physical symptoms. But at the same time, you have people who fast for, so let's say if everything was deterministic, the second you get hungry, you would abandon everything else and, go and get food. But you have people who fast for weeks. They don't eat any solid food. They might survive on water or whatever it is. But they're fasting for a purpose. They have a goal, and it overrides, that kind of mechanistic thing. So even digestion in heart, your heart rate, your breathing, there are people who claim that all of these things can be taken under conscious control, believe it or not, because it's actually, you have the subconscious mind. So the subconscious mind is not something that, it's not like this, woo-woo type thing. It really is something that exists. Even all psychologists pretty much acknowledge there's a subconscious mind that's running the show also. But it can, when you hypnotize people, they can do all kinds of crazy things. Hypnotizing is putting the mind in an altered state. So they have shown that when you hypnotize people, they can control their heart rate. They can control the blood flowing through their circulatory system in various areas of their body. They can shut down areas of their digestive system. This is all stuff you can go look up. So actually, it is the mind at a different level that's controlling all this, believe it or not. It's at a subconscious level. So that's what I would say. All this is explainable in terms of the mind.
I do. Excuse me. I do agree. Excuse me. I do agree that we do have a subconscious, and I do, which is again why I don't think we have free will, because free will would indicate that we're actually making a conscious decision, and the subconscious is actually making decisions unconsciously. That's why they call it subconscious. So I would be curious as to how you map a subconscious onto free will, because it seems to me to be the free will defeater, one of the many. But so I think we might be at an impasse of the mind body problem. Let me try one more angle, and because we can move on and just say we just can't. We just have an impasse at that particular point, and see if we could find another part of the conversation to engage. The essence. Let's look at the essence of the thing, because that's something else you brought up. But I think this your what would I call it? Your rejection of the materialist worldview, or however that was worded, is based on essence, right? The atoms, the molecules, they don't have the essence of consciousness or thought or whatever, or goals. So therefore they cannot be constructed in such a way that they would ever attain this property. Is that a fair way of summarizing your position?
You could probably say it that way.
Okay. Yeah, feel free to correct me anywhere you think I don't mean to misrepresent anything that you're saying. So I use this analogy. One of the things I noticed when I watched our conversation last time is I used a few different analogies, such as Legos and cars versus boats, to try and explain how you could combine materials in different ways to get different phenomenon out of it. And that was never actually addressed. And so I'd like to bring that up again, because that should be where the essence question gets solved, in my opinion. So I can take plastic, the molecules that make up plastic, right? And none of those molecules function as a car or a boat independently. They have no properties by themselves that will function in a way that a car can now drive down the street, or a boat can navigate through water. But I could combine those molecules with other molecules that themselves do not have any of these properties or functions, in such a way that the combination of these molecules creates a phenomenon of mobility, right? Combustion, for example, right? And I could then create a vehicle. I could create a car. I could create a boat. So when we combine molecules together, we get functions that those molecules don't independently contain. The neural network of the brain is the same thing. We can combine these molecules into such a way, well, we don't combine them, nature does, combines these molecules in such a complex way. And the neural network of the brain is the most complex thing on earth that as far as I know, far more complex than the world's greatest supercomputer. We have barely scratched the surface in understanding the complexity of the brain. It's amazing. So how do you think, can you address that? Because that got skipped over last time. So what do you think about that, when you're talking about your analogy of the essence of things, and my analogy of you don't need to contain the essence of something to get a phenomenon of something when you combine them together in such a way?
Right. So when you're talking about combining physical, like basic building blocks or units into a larger configuration, we have to ask, what is governing the entire configuration? So when it comes to like the Legos, you're still really talking about when in terms of how they will move and what they will be predicted to do. We're still talking about basically being under the purview of the fundamental laws of nature. Okay, so again, what are the fundamental laws of nature according to the materialist paradigm? There's there's basically four of them. We can argue about that if necessary, or debate that if necessary. But you have gravity, you have electromagnetism, you have the nuclear forces. All right. So and as someone with, well, I just don't want to go that way, but I'm aware of basically there are sophisticated computer programs that are basically designed. They're actually not even that sophisticated. Any configuration of material, you take the density, you take the way it's configured, and it can calculate exactly how it's going to behave based on external forces, based on what forces are applied to it and where. It can tell you exactly what's going to happen. So this is how they do precision guided missiles and things like that. Precision guided missiles, they develop a model of the digital model of the missile. They have to calculate what the forces are going to be, the wind force, the air pressure, all of that. So when you send it from the strike carrier or whatever it is, the ship, to the place on land to bomb whatever it is, then you can do that. So this is called mechanics. The field, it's a scientific field called mechanics. All right. So basically, whatever configuration is, it's all operating under the laws of nature. The problem is that again, when you're talking about things being governed by the laws of mechanics, they need some sort of impetus to do something other than that. So if something needs to go to a specific place at a specific time, the laws of nature aren't going to be able to do that. If you need a package delivered to Los Angeles, you can't just throw it up in the air and say, wind, take it in the right direction. No, there has to be a being, a consciousness that are taking us to where it needs to go. So you can imagine how hard things would be if we were just relying on the laws of nature to accomplish everything, including just basically acquiring food and these things that we need to do on a daily level. So the fact that there are these advanced configurations of the brain, if you analyze the brain, again, go back to my thought experiment. Start with a
Well, I want to stay focused on the essence part before, because we skipped over that.
Yeah. So what are we talking about with essence? Basically, the Lego, the essence of the Lego is the material of the building blocks. Okay. So in this case, it would be plastic. All right. So we have to ask, no matter what, the essence of plastic is always going to do whatever plastic does. And plastic can't make decisions, so it's always going to behave according to the laws of nature. So the essence of plastic doesn't have the capacity to do anything that would be considered goal-oriented.
No, I understand that, but my claim is that the essence of the molecules for the Legos, for the car, they don't contain buildingness or carness. But they can be combined in such a way that you can attach you can combine them to develop a combustible engine and create motion, local motion, right, out of something that in and of itself does not contain that. By combining the materials together, you get a phenomenon,
right.
Emergent phenomenon. And that's where, just like the brain, you combine this neural network together, you get an emergent phenomenon. So if it can't be done with the brain without a mind, how is it that we can combine the molecules together to get that to happen with a car? There's no carness in any molecule, and yet we can build cars.
There's no such thing as carness. That's what you understand. We're talking about platonic forms at this point, and those don't actually see. That's kind of, we got into that later. There's no such thing as carness. There's no such thing as tableness. There's no such thing as treeness, for trees. These are basically concepts. Again, this is something, when you talk about the transcendental argument for God, this is something that those people use to argue for God, that there's these platonic ideals out somewhere in this abstract ether reality of these ideas about like houseness, carness, and things like that. Aristotle himself even argued against this.
Aristotle argued against the Platonic forms, but the carness, it falls within Aristotle's own view of identity. So the identity, because Aristotle really is the one that came up with the laws of logic, right? So this falls within identity. How do we identify something? We classify these things in certain ways. So however you want to articulate that is fine with me, because I'm not inferring Platonic forms. I'm simply saying there is something that we call a car. And that is what we use in the word when we talk about essence. In fact, I think I have that. So essence is really hammered down. So essence is, what is a thing? When we identify something, is the essence a constituent of its parts, right? Or is essence something that's immaterial, like a form? I reject that to a certain degree. Well, actually, I'm not going to introduce that into this conversation, that there has to be this transcendental form. I do believe in transcendental things such as mathematics and geometry, but I don't believe in a Platonic realm of forms where there's this alternate universe where these forms exist. But I do believe in the concept that mathematics is actually transcendental and fundamental. But that's really irrelevant for this conversation. But there is such a thing, I think we can both agree on, is a car, however we want to define that, right?
Well,
Not really, actually. You have to understand that these categories are simply mental constructs. That's what's interesting. The car isn't a car because it's labeled a car. The car is basically an assembly of atoms that are in the configuration of a car. But at the end of the day, it really is just a bunch of atoms operating according to laws of physics. And they to get into that shape, they required a mind to put them that way. But that's, the creation evolution thing.
Okay, but there is a shape of a car, though, eventually at the end of the day. However it got there, there is such a thing as a car, though, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or you
well, what's governing?
Really?
The question is, what are whatever configuration the atoms are in, if it's the shape of a car or a boat or plane or whatever it is, what are the properties of the constituent elements? Okay, and if you analyze the totality of the configuration, let's just stick with the car. If you analyze the totality of what it is and what it can do, and every aspect of its constituent elements, you will come to a range of possibilities of what it's capable of doing without some sort of sense of agency. Okay. And what I'm trying to say is that when you analyze basically the constituent elements and the totality of a human being and other organisms, let's with a human, when you look at the brain, you look at the neurotransmitters, you look at the molecules in the brain, at no point does this emergent phenomenon of consciousness become possible according to the laws of known laws of nature. Okay. So that was my thought experiment. At what point how is it not even logically, I guess you would say scientifically, how do you explain how these atoms configure in the state of brain become capable of becoming goal-oriented, of being able to perceive and achieve goals? And my argument, or I'm not sure it's an argument, my position is that there's no point in the materialist paradigm where these things can achieve goal-oriented objectives. It requires a mind. So
yeah,
again,
you've consistently been making that argument, but I haven't heard you say why it cannot. I heard you say it cannot happen, but I haven't heard you explain why it cannot. It seems like coming from incredulity, it just cannot be this way. So it must be
probabilistically,
but
it's a probability argument. It's probability.
Well, how did you arrive at that probability? Because if you're basing this off of things that you've said cannot be measured or tested directly, you're looking at phenomenon at this point, and you're ascribing phenomenon to something that isn't actually independently observable. You're looking at observation, and I might be wrong here, so correct me if I'm wrong, because I do not want to misrepresent anything you're saying or meaning here. So feel free to jump in anytime. It seems to me, I'll try and be more careful with my language. It seems to me like you're looking at something and saying, I'm observing something, a goal, somebody's setting a goal to eat something. And there's no materialistic explanation for why something would want to eat. So it must have an independent mind behind it. But why must it? Why isn't it that just organic organisms function? The function of an organic organism is that it, by definition, I think in biology, is that it takes in energy, right? And it reproduces. I'm pretty sure that's the basic, very basic explanation of what organic organism is. Something that to that level, responding to its environment might be part of that. I'm not sure, but so at that point, that's just simply what it does. Just like water flows downhill simply because that's what it does. The laws of physics dictate this, but we can't go back. We can't go beyond the laws of physics. We can make assertions about what's beyond the laws of physics, but we can't. I've never seen the laws of physics violated. Now you have claimed the laws of physics not only can be violated, but do get violated every time somebody makes a choice. And that's another claim. it's a claim, but I've never seen any.
The laws of physics according to the materialist paradigm. Let's put it that way.
Well, I don't know of another paradigm that the laws of physics exist in. They only function with the material world. They only describe the material world, and it's.
Well, let me. I'm trying to figure out the best way to explain. I think it's just hard to convey what it is exactly. So you're talking about an organism wanting to eat. Okay. We have to explain that if materialism is true, we have to explain how that would happen from a purely materialistic standpoint. So, when you're starting with material, any mental activity has to be explained. Whether it's wanting something to eat, trying to survive, doing basic survival necessities and things like that. Any mental activity, we're trying to look at how this could happen within the framework of the materialist worldview or paradigm or thought or line of thinking. And the problem is that with the materialist paradigm, you have a very limited set of boundary conditions which can be applied and see if they solve the problem. So you have the laws of nature acting upon matter. That's all you have. You don't have anything. You don't have a mind in the materialist paradigm. So can that set of tools explain organisms doing things and making choices, whatever they may be? And the reason that's a problem is because the laws of physics don't care about goals. The laws of physics just do what they do. So if you had, let's again start with the atom. The atom's just gonna, if you start with one atom, it's just going to be there. It's going to float around. It's not going to care if it can't care. It doesn't care. Okay, put another atom. Put enough of atoms to put it in the shape of a human being. None of the atoms individually cares about staying in the shape of a human. None of the atoms is aware that none of the atoms individually is aware that they are all combined into the shape of a human being. They don't care about surviving. They don't care about reproducing. They don't care about moving this way or that. All they're doing is responding to electromagnetic forces, the forces of gravity, the atomic forces, the things like that. So if you're an organism and you don't have a capacity from an essential standpoint, when I say essential, I mean the essence of what makes up your being, then you're not going to at any point be capable of achieving any goal, including finding food, eating, taking care of basic necessities, reproducing. So the materialistic tool set is insufficient to explain what we observe. So because we observe things, the thing is we're observing reality, and we're just saying if you logically take the full set of what materialism says is possible, then it can't explain what we observe. Because if it was just materialism, then the atoms would just be moving in a very deterministic way, not with any goals in mind. But the fact that we see organisms operating in goal-oriented ways basically necessitates that's just not what's happening. There is at some level the material that makes up our bodies is breaking the deterministic laws that would determine whether they would go this way or that and going in the direction of a certain goal, which wouldn't be possible if it was just atoms moving around in space, whatever the configuration may be.
I think we can move. I'm tempted to try one more time to see if I can land this plane with you with the components of something as opposed to the combination of what the components produce, because I don't think you've really, and again, it's an analogous relationship. And I admit up front that analogies are always going to fall short at some point, right? That's just the nature of analogies. But so maybe it's just a waste of time, but let me try one more time. The car contains these particular elements. None of them have a car inside of them, right? None of them have combustion or whatever. I mean, right. Someone could say an atom at the atomic level, but we're not getting there. We're just going to accept that it doesn't have a combustible engine inside of an atom. But we put these together. We get a car that can drive down the road. So those components none of those components have goals to become a car,
right?
But they can be combined in such a way that we build a car out of it. and that car functions, and all that aligns up with the laws of physics, right?
Okay.
So when it comes to the
Well, what if, okay, here's a breakdown. Everything you
Okay.
just said, I agree with. There's no problem. The things they arrange themselves in the shape of a car, and then they can do more as a combination than they could individually.
Okay.
But let's say you need that car to go to a specific place at a specific time. Can the laws of physics get that car to the right place at the right time without any decision-making process being input? I'm going to have to argue.
No, I would say not.
Good.
But this is where the analogy would fail, because the car's not organic and it doesn't have a neural network. So that's where my analogy would fail.
Well, here's the problem with that. The idea of something being organic versus unorganic, this is a linguistic label that you apply on something that we perceive as organic. But at the end of the day, according to the materials component, it's all the same essence. It's all just materials of equal essence in different configurations based on the history of how those atoms got to where they were and in which
That's right. I agree with that. But
there's no such thing as organic.
Well, how can there not be such a, well, the language is certainly subjective. It's something we use to identify something, and we can identify animate versus inanimate objects, and however we want to label them is essentially irrelevant, because we see there's a fundamental difference between how animate, but the fundamental difference doesn't have to be the components. It's the arrangement of components. So we can classify arrangements in a particular manner, become animate. Arrangements in another manner are not animate. We don't need to introduce a third element to that. We just simply have two separate groups. One is animate, one is inanimate. It's all the same components.
It is all the same components. The question is, why do we label something as we in our general basically in our general experience see that there are animate objects versus inanimate objects. So we know that these categories really exist. But what I'm trying to explain is the materialist paradigm at the essential level can't allow for there being fundamental essential differences between inanimate and animate. It's all the same building blocks operating according to the same governing principles. So you have to explain it. You can't explain it all within that paradigm. You can't explain why animate.
Well, the explanation seems pretty obvious to me anyway. The explanation is when we organize these elements in a particular set of ways, it produces the organic phenomenon. When we organize them in a different way, the opposite set of ways or whatever, it does not produce the organic phenomenon. Just in the same way that we organize elements in a particular way, we form a car, we organize the elements in a different way, and we form a table. There's no table in the car, there's no car in the table, but they have the same basic building blocks, but we organize them in a particular way, we get cars. We organize them in a different way, we get tables. In the same way, we organize these elements in a particular way, we get organic materials, organic organisms. We organize them in a different way, we get planets. A different way, we get suns. In a different way, we get oceans, so on and so forth. So it's just the different ways of putting the building blocks together. Right. It's just kind of like the Lego thing. We could build a ship, a car, a house, or whatever out of a million different things we can build out of the same basic Lego set. So whatever our imagination produces.
Right. The problem is, how do you get from, okay, we put the Legos in a very complex configuration. You can do that. We put the atoms in the shape of, let's just say, a human. There's a big difference between doing that and getting the atoms in the human-shaped configuration to have the ability to achieve goals, okay? So to achieve a certain goal, you have to basically, you have to not do what the laws of nature would dictate that you would do. Otherwise, you couldn't achieve the goal. So let's, again, the laws of physics aren't going to bring the atoms in my body to the grocery store. Let's just say we wiped out my consciousness, knocked me out cold, and my body just flopped down on the floor. How long would it take me to get to the grocery store? Probably never get there. I probably just, sit there and rot. So what I'm trying to say is, but I can get to the grocery store in 5 minutes using my mind. because I'm not doing what the laws of physics. I'm not waiting for electromagnetism and the nuclear forces and gravity to, in thermodynamics to move my body. I'm making a decision that my mind uses to send a signal to my brain to move my legs to my car that I use to drive to the grocery store, and I'll get there in a few minutes. If I was just an assembly of atoms that in the shape of a human that needed to get to the grocery store, it would never happen, probabilistically. I mean, it might happen, but one in a bazillion. So the fact that I can go directly to the grocery store shows that the atoms, there's something essentially different about the atoms of my body versus the atoms, in this pad of paper I'm holding. You can't see it. This pad of paper is going to sit here on my desk until basically the end of time because it can't make a decision. So it's an inanimate object. So it's not just about arranging the atoms in a certain fixture. It's about how do they gain this additional property of acting in a goal-oriented way. That's the secondary question.
Let me just cut real quick. It's already, the time has flown by so fast on this. It's already 2:30, and I think you said 2 hours is your limit on these, or they're within.
Yeah, I have a hard cutoff at my time.
Okay,
6
I
p.m.
want to open up. I always open up the panel to people to join, and I think it would probably be, if I don't do it now, we're not going to have time, and I think people are going to have a lot of questions. If you don't mind, I'd like to do that. The only problem is I accidentally erased this out of my address bar. I need to reload this page, and I'm concerned it may mess with the stream if I do that.
You can rejoin your own stream. What do you need to do? Oh, what do you need to do exactly?
I accidentally erased the. Can you do me a favor and copy and paste the link into the comments?
Sometimes it doesn't let you.
Oh, that's right. If you're not a mod,
I was able to do it. I was able to do it.
You were able to. Okay, give me 1 second here. Let me see.
I just posted it. I just posted the link in the chat.
Okay. I don't see it in the chat. Is it in the YouTube chat?
It's in the YouTube chat. Oh, you want me to post it in the StreamYard chat?
I'm going to pin it from the YouTube chat. I just need to go into YouTube so I can. How do I get? Give me 1 second to figure this out. I'm so sorry. So keep talking while I figure this out here.
Yeah.
So, go ahead.
I can tell that there is an impasse, and I think that the impasse has been reached because I just don't know how exactly to explain. I think I'm not doing a good enough job of explaining why there is a problem. Basically, I have been focusing over the course of our last two conversations about specifically why the materialist paradigm can't account for free will. Now, there's a lot of other things we could talk about in terms of free will, and this does relate to the mind-body problem. Why is it that for free will to exist, there needs to necessarily exist a mind, at the very least? If you want to say there's a consciousness beyond that, that's something I'm willing to change my mind on. That maybe the mind is the consciousness, all of that, because it's kind of difficult to know exactly. Basically, the mind-body problem, to explain what we observe in reality, based on what we see things doing, the materialist paradigm cannot work. There must be something addition to material, and I believe that the mind is a necessary aspect to explain what we're observing. Okay, and that the mind is what provides the capacity for will, and yes, I would say free will, agency. Not that free will and agency are the same thing, but you can't have agency, which obviously is something we observe living things having, within the materialist paradigm. And if you go through the thought experiments I put forward and try to explain it purely in terms of materialism, from the basic building blocks up to the larger aggregate level, at no point do you get a situation where materialism can explain goal-oriented activity. I just don't think you can.
I don't see the link that you said you posted in the chat. I looked at YouTube.
Did you maybe it's because do you see where it says top chat? Maybe you have to go to live chat. Sometimes, wait, let me see here. Oh, it might have.
It might have deleted it. You might have blocked it. YouTube sometimes, if you're not a mod, doesn't
Yeah,
let you
you're
Is
right.
Tilting Windmill's still in the let me
Okay, I put it in the StreamYard chat though, the private StreamYard chat. Maybe check
Oh,
there.
okay, perfect. That'll be where I could grab it. Thank you so much. Okay. A good idea. Okay. Copy link. Okay. That's the solution right there. Okay. Good call on the private chat, bud. Okay, so yeah, anybody who wants to join the conversation, now would definitely be the opportunity. And we could continue the conversation after Ace leaves. There was some really interesting stuff brought up here. I do think that we are at an impasse with the mind-body situation. The violating the laws of physics, I can't get my head around that. Maybe in the next conversation, if you could find some, and I'll do my own due diligence too. I'll see if I can find anything at all that would allow for that to be possible.
Well, okay, yeah. I would say you're not going to be able to find it in the current materialist paradigm. The whole point is that the materialist paradigm is insufficient. So I'll just put that out there.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think, yeah. So maybe you could give me something in philosophy or something, anything you could bring to the table for that I would be willing to look into for sure. But without being able to, let me see, did that show up here? Yeah, without being able to cite anything, I'm not sure if oh, can I pin it from here? I can. Okay, people still hear me talking when I'm off screen?
Yeah, I can hear you at least.
Yeah.
Here we are. Okay, excellent. I was able to get that pinned. Okay, so I'm so sorry, you guys. I'm so dysfunctional with this technology. Every day I do a stream, it's a new learning experience for me. But it's embarrassing, Robert. Do I have? Yeah, I'm not sure how that comment even got.
Hey, your mic is picking up everything you're doing.
Okay. Yeah. So let me give you each an opportunity to speak to Ace while he's still here. And just to defend Ace, he's told me from the beginning of this whole series of discussions that he really has to do a hard stop at 2 hours. So he's not running away. I don't want anybody to give him a hard time about that. He definitely told me ahead of time. And we're gonna have to get into part 3 at least of this. But I think what we're gonna do is just come to a point to where we admit that we might be at an impasse on the mind body, but let's see if I could defend the materialist worldview and ethics and morality, which is something we were supposed to talk about today, but never got into. So in part 3, let's see if I could at least defend that position to A's satisfaction. And if not, we could parse that out and then maybe just draw it to a conclusion. So Robin, I think you were here first. I've lost track, but why don't you feel free to introduce yourself, tell everybody about your channel, which is awesome. I saw your video last night, your live stream. That was so much fun. And then we'll let Dan introduce himself. And then, of course, Robin, ask your question to Ace, and then we'll go to Dan, and then we'll work our way around the room. So Robin, you go ahead and have the floor and introduce yourself and ask Ace your question.
Okay, first I want to say that I said A, and that's not A. It was Dan. That's Mike is picking up like all of that. Like I had the wrong person. I didn't like so. But I'm Robin Webster, and I'm an atheist, and I'm a determinist. And I just want to ask A, like, have you taken like I feel like when I missed a lot of the stream. So, but I came in when you were talking about like the sense of hunger and stuff, and like I feel like that you have maybe a fundamental misconception about how much we can explain through natural processes on material. Like if you go down to the atom part, I think that atoms like do follow the law of physics. I think that anything they do is going to be able to be shown that it is something that follows the law of physics. Now, when we get to like us, a biological animal who has evolved over time, we have evolved with certain chemical processes that actually provide us with the feeling of hunger. Like that is something that our body does to keep us alive. And and we can actually show, like if you study evolution and the evolution of like the digestive system or whatever, we can show how that has evolved over time to do that. Like I'm just wondering if, to me, it seems like that in physics and in biology that this would be a huge problem if our explanations were not sufficient.
It would be a problem for the materialist paradigm. It would. Now, evolution has nothing to do with us observing that organisms get hungry. It could be just the way God designed us. So evolution doesn't have anything to do with what we observe about what organisms do. I just want to throw that out there. So
that's not true, though. That's fun. I mean, like evolution has a lot to do with our function.
So do we need a long time ago, before people believed in evolution, did we not know that organisms got hungry?
I mean, you are assuming God in the equation.
No, I'm not. Answer my question, please. I don't want to interrupt. So please answer. You can answer as you feel fit. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, I'm sorry I interrupted yours, but I think that you're fundamentally like skipping my main question is.
Well, you said, let me just, this is what I heard. I heard you say, well, we can see because of evolution that over time organisms have evolved to be hungry and basically do things in their environment. And my point is simply that evolution is completely superfluous. That we can observe organisms doing that without thinking that they evolved over time. Like there was a long time before people believed in evolution at a mass scale, before Darwin came along, that we observed organisms being hungry and doing things in their environment. And we were classifying them into hierarchies and categories. We have the Linnaean classification system, all of these things way before evolution came along. So evolution isn't necessary to explain literally anything that you've mentioned. I'm not trying to be rude. It's just, there's no reason to bring up evolution. Now, the point is, how can any of this happen in a world where everything, including the bodies that make up living beings, operate according to immutable deterministic laws of physics? Like, what if the salmon, salmon swim upstream to reproduce? This is something that everyone knows. Now, if the salmon was just like an inanimate object in the shape of a fish, it would flow downstream. But what do? They swim upstream because they're deciding in their mind, their little fish minds, to swim upstream to go to their reproduction grounds. Okay. So, go ahead.
Okay. First of all, before we discovered evolution, and we discovered it, we could explain, yes, things got hungry. We could not explain why. Like the reason so that's why we came up with free will. That's why we came up with this concept of this is why this happens, because these things choose to do it. However, once we started studying biology through the word paradigm, I don't know, but like through the lens of biological processes and the evolution of that over time, we began to be able to explain why. And it comes down to very little of it comes down to anywhere where we can show that there's actually a will of something to do this, that is beyond a natural process, beyond a chemical process. And so the fish do not choose to swim upstream. Like fish do not have they swim upstream because of I think it's a smell maybe apparatus that they have that sends them back to that scent. I'm not really familiar with fish, but I do know that we kind of understand why all these animals do these things. Like
they're choosing to do them.
They're not choosing. They do them by biological, just evolutionary.
So you think? Let me ask you this: do you think that the reason a fish swims upstream is the same process that makes the water in the stream flow downstream?
Sort of physics. Yeah.
Okay, so you have water flowing downstream, being governed by the same laws of physics that make the fish go upstream.
I think you're comparing two. You're making a category error first there. But the thing
everything in your paradigm, everything's operating according to laws of physics.
I don't have a paradigm. I just I follow the evidence.
Well, here's my thing. According to your explanatory scheme, you have the laws of physics determining the water go downhill, while at the same time determining that the fish swim against the very water that is being determined to go downhill. So I think you have a very serious problem. Why does the fish somehow behave differently than the water?
But can we go back?
Well, let's do.
Well, hold on. Let me. Okay. That is,
I'm done.
yeah, that is a fair question, and I don't know that. Yeah, so that will be. I want to give everyone a fair opportunity, and so I don't want to. Yeah, let me. That's a good question, Robin. And I appreciate A's. I appreciate you fielding that. Dr. Norton, you were here next, and then we'll go. Chris, we're going to jump to you, and then A's. We're going to give you a chance to make sure there's enough time for you to have a final word. So don't worry about that. We'll make sure there's time for you. Dan, go ahead and introduce yourself, your channel, and then if you have a question for A's, feel free.
Okay. Hi. Thanks for being here and letting us participate. I have a YouTube channel at Dan Norton 1, and I promote Ayn Rand's philosophy of objectivism. I've also given a lot of thought to these kinds of issues, philosophy of mind and free will. So I guess one point I'll make here is I think I might be somewhere between OE and A's philosophy on this mind-body issue. So I guess I'm not a materialist, and I don't think that. I guess one question I had for OE is, which I put in the chat, is why I think that the laws of physics apply to consciousness or the mind, because it's not clear to me that consciousness or the mind is something physical, and because it has different properties, like the beliefs, for instance, are a mental phenomenon. They have the property of being true or false. But can things like atoms, can an atom be true or false, or is that a kind of category error? There are certain properties which don't seem to apply to material things, which do apply to mental things. So if things have different properties, then you might think, well, then they shouldn't be identified with each other, and we shouldn't be materialists about everything. So that's one way in which I differ from OE. On the other side, where I differ from A's philosophy is at least one place I differ. I do think there, or at least I'm not convinced there couldn't be goal-directed action in a purely material system like a plant. Like, I don't think rocks and rivers engage in goal-directed behavior, but I do think plants do. Like, their plants are trying to get sunlight or stretch their roots out to find more water. So I do think plants act in goal-directed ways, not consciously directed, but goal-directed nonetheless. And I think evolution helps to explain what's going on here. Like, if something doesn't act in a way that keeps it in existence, then it will be weeded out of existence. Only those combinations which act to sustain their own survival stick around. So I think there's at least a way of looking at vegetative action such that it is goal-directed. And this also applies to certain aspects of human beings. Like, I have vegetative functions within my body, like the circulatory system. That's not something under my conscious control. Or my heartbeat, the digestion of food. There are lots of things that go on, cellular metabolism. There's lots of things that go on in my body which I'm not consciously directing or even aware of necessarily. But there are other things, like having this conversation on YouTube right now, which I am consciously directing. So I think we can divide the aspects of living beings into automatic vegetative kinds of functions and then conscious functions. And I would agree with you, A's, that materialism doesn't explain the actions of human beings or of animals that are consciously directed. But I do think there are some aspects like cellular metabolism or the phototropic effects in plants, which I do think can be explained materialistically. And just I'll make one last point. Vitalism is a term which, if you look in the history of science, was a popular viewpoint, I think, through the 19th century and maybe through the early 20th century. And that was the last holdout of for special plant forces. But after the discovery of DNA and maybe some other discoveries in biological science, vitalism became rejected, I think, by the majority of scientists, which is not to say that they've rejected consciousness. That's still like the last domain of mystery. Like, how can we explain that on materialist grounds? I don't think anyone has done that, but at least plant action, vegetative action, I think many scientists today think that that can be explained through laws of physics. And I'll just pause there.
It is.
Yeah, you said a number of things which interest me. As far as vitalism, well, yes, in the 18th and 19th century, there was a movement which basically took atheistic philosophy, materialistic philosophy, and imposed it on the scientific field to make it look like, quote unquote, science is equivalent to believing in materialism, physicalism, methodological naturalism, all of these things. So they rejected vitalism, not because it didn't explain what we were observing, but because it was, not within the realm of their philosophical presuppositions and commitments. So I really think that vitalism still has a place in actual science, not in the science that we can, quantify and define and measure, but but in terms of having explanatory power. You also made another comment about how there are certain over time, certain configurations of matter have arisen which are more capable of reproducing, and this is why they have basically, this is the idea of evolution, because the plants are more capable of passing on their DNA to the next generation and so on and so forth, and this is why they have arisen over time, because they're more successful. The thing is, the materialist paradigm, for that very reality to exist, cannot coincide with the materialist paradigm, because you have to understand, for something to be better at reproducing suggests that there is an ideal state that these configurations of matter want to be in. In the materialist paradigm, that's totally absurd and senseless. Atoms don't care if they're in the shape of a plant. Molecules don't care if they're in the shape of a snake or a bacteria or anything. Atoms don't care if they are in the shape of a DNA and they're reproducing their DNA and passing on. None of that is philosophically consistent with the idea of materialism, which is that everything is just this mindless matter floating around in space. Everything is just operating according to the law of physics. Nothing's trying to reproduce. Nothing's trying to pass on its DNA to the next generation. So this is a serious philosophical blunder the materialists are making when they say, well, materialism's true and evolution's true because evolution explains how things got to where they are. None of they can't exist in the same world. Nothing's trying to evolve. Nothing in the materialist paradigm. Nothing.
Can I push back?
Okay, go ahead.
Oh,
go ahead.
Yeah, hold on. Yeah, Chris, go ahead and introduce yourself, and then you'll have a question for A's, and then A's, I'll give you a final thought before you have to go, and then everyone could stay for the conversation.
Okay. One of the things that you're just kind of not exactly categorical error or whatever is that you're essentially bound by the assumption that evolution is based on a perfect system. It's not. Otherwise, why the hell do we still have congenital diseases and like innate deficiency hardware within our species? So what I'm getting at is that evolution is not perfect. It's just good enough so that you can survive long enough for essentially the reproductive cycle to continue. Everything else is irrelevant to that stuff. Second point is that if you go through the understanding that thinking and consciousness is a byproduct of us being prey for most of the majority of our history as a species, we were prey, not predator. So with that logic, you understand that we had to basically start to solve problems and create instinctively, because out in the wild, if we were just one organism, well, I say one organism, but one individual, we would basically be dead quick in the grand scheme of things. Versus nature, that's what we would ended up. So that's where you get the cooperation mechanism. Well, not mechanism. Well, strategy of survival, and then so on. We have to create tools. So we have to create thinking.
Mm.
All of this is our drivers of keeping us alive long enough for us to overcome the adversity that is presented to us over the span of time. So
Okay.
Yeah, there's just a fundamental philosophical, deep flaw in what you're saying, and that's in the materialist paradigm. There's no ideal state for any matter or configuration of matter to want to be in. So the idea there's this ideal state called a living organism that has to evolve to basically develop all these traits. You know, you can imagine matter, the expansion of the Big Bang or whatever you want to call it. We have to get into the shape of a human to survive. No, like all this matter just blowing around.
I'm not saying that.
Hold on, I'm not trying to respond. I need to respond because I don't have much time. According to the materialist paradigm, there is no reason matter would want to form into a shape where it has to survive. You know, the matter in your body doesn't care if it's in the shape of a human. It doesn't care if it evolves the ability to defend itself. You know, there's matter out there blowing around in space and giant stars just blowing up and being burned up, and none of it cares. It can't feel anything. And all of a sudden, we get Earth, we get all these conditions, and now we have to quote unquote survive. The atoms are like, we have to be able to pass on our you can imagine this ridiculous scenario where atoms are like, now we have to figure out how we're gonna metabolize energy. So we have to figure out how we're gonna synthesize protein. So we have to have to figure out how we're gonna be conscious. No, matter in the material. I'm not saying you are, but materialist paradigm. There's no evolution can't happen because there's no ideal state to be survived to. Okay?
We're still evolving.
But hold on. But why? Why does the matter in your body, hair, and I think try to imagine yourself as an atom or a molecule, pairing what shape it's configured in with all the other matter in the universe. Why does the matter in your body from materialist paradigm care about surviving? All you have is matter and energy. You can't get to a place where there is an ideal state of a configuration of matter to be.
I'm okay with that.
Go ahead, try it.
I'm okay with not being in an ideal state and continually being in an ideal state.
Okay, so that's that is. Hold on, Chris. I know I want to let you. Chris, you're still gonna be here when Ace is gone, and you'll have plenty of opportunity to articulate that thought. And I'm sorry to interrupt. I don't mean to be rude. Forgive me, but we are on the clock here at A's. I want to give you a chance as the guest. Try to be a gracious host and give you the final word. And I want to get a hold of you on email and set up part 3 of this and see if we can get into the ethics and morality. But before you do, let me give a quick closing remark. I'll just be real brief with it, and then I'll give you the stage. Okay. Right, I feel like we're probably going to be at an impasse unless we could find some studies or something that I could get some kind of evidence for these claims. We're probably going to be at an impasse for the mind-body problem and to what materialistic view can or cannot explain. And I'm willing to look into it. Maybe A's could bring something to the table next conversation for that. Otherwise, I think we're going to have to be at an impasse. And this is part of what I do with this channel, is to show people that there are going to come times when you have to simply agree to disagree and maintain a level of respect for yourself and for your interlocutor. And so that may be where A's and I have to do, is just say, hey, we're just at an impasse here. I do think there's room to move the conversation forward and just couch that and say, okay, let's see if we could discuss the effects of something like ethics and morality on free will, and look at some of the studies that have shown evidence for how decisions can be tracked to biological processes and environmental process or environment reactions to the environment, interaction with the environment, things of that nature, and maybe just summarize everything in this third video. So that would be a quick closing statement. A's, why don't you go ahead and have the floor, and you have your closing remarks. Tell people about your channel, where they can find you. And thank you so much for coming by, as always. I really enjoy speaking to you.
Yeah, so I do have to basically run at this point. It's unfortunate because even though we're obviously in a place where there's disagreement, I honestly believe, even though people will probably listen to this conversation and say nothing was accomplished, I completely disagree. I think ground was made. I think, we got more terms depth. I think we are making progress in this conversation, and I'm absolutely willing to go forward, continue this line of thought as long as it needs to be, or look into other areas of this discussion. Absolutely. So even though I know we're in a place where people are in disagreement, there's apparently an impasse in at least one aspect of this conversation. I'm absolutely willing to continue, and I'm enjoying it. I think it's been respectful, and I think it's been beneficial, productive, all of that. As far as addressing things that were actually said, I can hear. I think someone needs to mute their mic. By the way, it's just kind of distracting me a little bit. Yeah. Again, there's really so much. I guess the thing is, I think that the materialists are the one making the positive claim, so they have to prove to me that they are the ones who can explain everything that's being observed in terms of purely mechanistic processes, and why I should think to myself that there's no need for this immaterial or mind or whatever it is, mind, soul, consciousness. To me, when I examine the materialist worldview, the materialist paradigm in terms of the question of free will, which I think just the basic observation is that things do have free will, or they do have will, they do have agency. When you're going to claim to me that there is no free will, there is no will, there is no agency, you're the one who's making what I would consider an extraordinary claim. You're making a positive claim. And what you're saying is that the positive claim you're making is that the materialist worldview can, in fact, does have explanatory power for everything that's being observed. So when I say like, look at the atom, you're trying to tell me there's a worldview where if you just have a simple system, a configuration of atoms, that it's going to act in a goal-oriented way, and you're telling me you're giving me the full set of tools that you're working with, the laws of nature and pure matter and energy, and you're going to say I can explain how, once it gets to a certain level of complexity, then it's going to start engaging in goal-oriented activity. And remember, it has to be able to accomplish a goal or it can't survive. We see organisms surviving. The question is, how are they doing that in a materialist paradigm? How can they engage in goal-oriented activity in a materialist paradigm when all they have to work with is the deterministic laws of physics, which would not necessarily determine that they go in the direction of their goal? This is a really, really serious problem, and people need to think about it. And just some of the comments about evolution and all of this and how things are evolved, you have to put yourself in the problem is that the materialist paradigm is so far from observed reality. People have a hard time of comprehending what would actually happen in a purely materialistic universe. We wouldn't have things evolving. There's no ideal state of a configuration of an organism in the materialist paradigm. It's just all matter, mindless matter blowing around in space. Nothing cares about reproducing. Nothing cares about passing on its genes to the next generation so it can continue to propagate its species. And not even individual configurations of atoms don't care about maintaining that configuration. If something did happen to evolve, arrange itself into the shape of a fish, it's not even going to know. The matter in that fish isn't even going to know. It's not going to care. If something so spectacular were to just happen by the pure laws of physics, blowing atoms around in space, it would be a blip in the event in the span of cosmic history that nothing would even notice from the materialist paradigm. There's no need to survive. There's no concern about surviving. All this matter flowing around, the idea of survival, reproduction, goals, these are all things that can only exist in a world where there's purpose, there's inherent purpose, and things are created with a purpose in mind according to a goal that has been established by a mind. And I would say a universal mind is the mind of God. So these are all things I would encourage people to think about. Again, so I know I got the final word, and it's kind of unfair to just leave all that out there and just drop out. But again, it was a time limit, and again, I'll be back. So if people want to discuss all this, I absolutely am willing to come back, and we're gonna have to do it then, because unfortunately we can't do it now. But I appreciate you all, bringing me on, and hopefully we'll continue this on. Thank you so much.
It's always a pleasure to have you, A's. Despite our disagreements, we've never had an unfriendly conversation, and like I said, I really want to. I guess I should put everybody back on the screen here. Nobody knows who
I'm
that
just
is.
going to drop out
Yeah.
later, y'all.
Yeah, that's good.
I'll the rest of it later. Sorry.
Thanks so much for stopping by, brother. I'll be in touch on email. We'll set up part 3 of this, and I'm looking forward to it, by the way.
Yep. Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, so that's what I'm trying to do with this YouTube channel is to bring people together who have different ideas. And I really appreciate Robin, Chris, and Dan for pushing back, but doing it in a intelligent and respectful manner, not getting emotionally charged about it, because I know that a lot of times these conversations do get out of hand really quickly. And I just really appreciate you guys for setting that kind of example. So what I want to do is give each of you guys an opportunity to have a response, because I think you asked questions. I don't know if you got an answer that satisfied you or not, or maybe you have a comment to make about that. You're also welcome to address any questions to me. I know, Dan, you had a particular question for me as well, which I'm happy to address because I think it's an interesting one about what I would refer to as qualia. But I think I should do it in reverse order this time, since Chris, you kind of got cut off, and I apologize about that. So I'll start with Chris, go to Dan, and then to Robin, if that's okay with everybody. So Chris, you have the floor, brother.
Okay. Well, I don't know exactly how to describe the impasse we're getting on, like what exactly vestiges is of that, but it's just, for me personally, when it comes to evolution, I do kind of like understand that it is a continuous process. There's no end game for evolution specifically. It's just that we as a species were essentially given the sandbox, well, the prism of the sandbox that is the human body. So, and as and basically we can go through the attributes that what may kind of make us break the break the meta, if so to speak, as I told you about tools, and also the idea that cooperation as a survival tactic kind of gets into this, but it's just that not the idea of being like the saying that A's argument was saying that this is just totally absurd, that we are in that evolution or the universe doesn't need to have an explanation for what it does and why it's doing it. And it's just, for me, how I kind of see it, and probably it's just a too zoned in view, is that when it comes to individual or either organism or microorganism, it's like the need for survival is very, very, very important to do what we need to do in order to basically survive. So, and there's the idea of going to the goal to reproduce and so on and so forth. It's just those are the drivers of what evolution just does. Anyway, sorry, I've been ranting along.
No, not at all. I agree with a lot of what you said. In fact, pretty much everything what you said. I think you offer some really good pushback. My concern with the way that the response came from A's, and I'm not throwing shade on the brother when he's not here to defend himself.
Sure.
Just to kind of articulate things and try and be respectful when I do it, is I think some of the language that he tends to use betrays his presupposition. When he starts talking about Adam's quote unquote wanting to do something, I feel like that's kind of being hijacked into the conversation. And I don't think he's doing it to be malicious or dishonest. I don't think that there's any malicious intent whatsoever. I just think it's his own particular view on things causes him to see it in this such a way that something has to have a desire. So when we say goal, for example, like Dr. Norton was talking about, plants have a quote unquote goal. When we use that type of vernacular, it can infer a particular aspect into the conversation that I don't see as necessary. Things doing what they do because of the laws of physics, to me, can are the same thing as what we're describing as goals. You know, when we say
Yeah.
goals, I think that there needs to be a real specific category for what does set a goal. And that's very limited to the human brain, as far as I can tell. And that has to do with the prefrontal cortex. That's, to me, it's very simple. It's fundamental biology. I don't think we get goals in plants. I don't think we get goals in rocks. I don't think we get goals. I think the laws of physics determine all of this. And I think the laws of physics and biology determine the prefrontal cortex development. So I don't see a problem with the goals in human beings. I don't think we need to be special in any regard. It's just a more evolved state of the same building blocks. So that's kind of what I saw in all that. And I think Robin will have a better pushback on the evolutionary side of things. She's probably much more informed than I am of this, but that's just what I see as it, with my own ignorance of the situation of evolution. We'll be having Austin Sims. I hope we're talking about him coming by in 2 weeks. So he should be able to shed a lot of light on this conversation for all those of you who know who Austin Sims is. Robin did put a link. Before I get to you, Dan, just let me highlight this. Robin put a link in the chat talking about one of the things she mentioned. So I've highlighted that on the screen here for you guys to check out. Dan, go ahead and I'll turn the floor over to you, brother. What do you have to say about all this? You might be muted.
Yeah, so I think when A's was talking about atoms not caring about such and such, I think that's right, but I don't think that's what the materialists claim these days. And I'm not defending materialism about everything, but I do think like plants are just material beings. I don't think they have a conscious element. And I put in the YouTube chat that I'll just read what I wrote. It's just one line. Atoms don't, quote, care about being in certain arrangements, but they're naturally selected to be in certain arrangements which promote those arrangements' existence. So I think the theory of evolution does provide a way of looking at plant action, which enables us to see them as acting in a goal-directed way, in a way that they act such that their own survival is maintained. They're not consciously acting so that their survival is maintained, but the reason they're acting in the way that they're acting is because those particular actions, like turning their leaves towards the sunlight, have been naturally selected for. And this can be looked at from different levels. And I think the best book on this topic, which I also put in the chat, the one that taught me the most about this, it's a book called The Biological Basis of Teleological Concepts by Dr. Harry Binswanger. He's also a student of Ayn Rand. He explains how, if you look at it from what you might call a efficient cause perspective, this is Aristotelian terminology. Aristotle had this idea that there's 4 types of causes. There's the formal cause, the material cause, the efficient cause, and the final cause. And Binswanger in his book argues that you can look at the same action from a final cause perspective, that is, an entity acting for the sake of some goal, or you could also look at it from an efficient cause perspective, where it's being necessitated to act in a certain way by laws of physics. And these two perspectives are not incompatible. They're just different perspectives on one and the same activity. And I don't know that I can do that that viewpoint justice in the course of this brief panel discussion, but if this sounds interesting, I would recommend checking out that book. And I need another cough drop. So that's just what I'll add to the discussion on A's. And we could talk more about the point I raised for you if you want, OE. So I had asked, how could there be, or why think that the laws of physics need to explain something like consciousness, which isn't obviously a physical type of thing. That's one point. And then just more directly on your last segment, I think you said plants don't have goals, just like rocks don't have goals, but I think plants do have goals. And I don't know if you want to talk about that, but those are 2 points I would raise for you.
Yeah, just real quick. So I'm not actually a strict materialist. I do believe there are some transcendental things. I mentioned the word qualia. So what is it? Often an analogy I often use is like, what does it feel like to sit next to a warm fire? Oh, I can take this off the screen here. Something like that. In philosophy, it's taught. They mentioned something like the redness of red, things of this nature. That the laws of that a strictly materialist viewpoint some would say is not necessarily sufficient explanation for. I do believe that mathematics is actually transcendental and fundamental. So everything is, but I don't claim there's this realm of forms, Platonic forms, but I just think at the core of every single thing we have a mathematical algorithm or a geometric shape that things conform to. So I think that there's some transcendental thing there. So I do actually believe in that transcendental things can exist. However, when it comes to something like consciousness and mind, I don't see any reason to believe that they are anything other than emergent properties of a brain. And the reason for that is based on the simple fact that when we affect the brain, we clearly seem to affect both what people attribute to mind and consciousness. Also, we don't observe what people tend to attribute to mind or consciousness in anything like a rock or even now the plant analogy. There are studies being done which I think are interesting, and I'm not well versed in them yet, but I might look into them more. And I would encourage everyone to do their own research in this. But there are studies being done in bioelectric chemical processes with organic or simple organic organisms that might infer that consciousness is maybe at a more basic and rudimentary definition of consciousness anyway, is at a more fundamental level. So that's when I was trying to hammer down definitions with A's. If we think of consciousness as just simply responding to your environment, then maybe, even single celled organisms can be considered conscious at that point. But then we're really just, consciousness doesn't carry any weight in a conversation about something like a mind or free will or anything else, because we're just talking about responding to our environment. So I can even concede that talking point, but I don't see why then we would be at a brain. Why? Because of how we affect these things when we affect the brain itself. And I've cited this before on my show several times. Split brain patient studies are really good things for people to look into. The other thing that people can look into is, Az even mentioned it himself, is hypnosis, things of this nature. We could look into people with mental disabilities. And so because of all these scientifically verifiable observations that we can test, we can make predictions, so on and so forth. That's why I don't think there's a need for anything other than to say it's emergent property of a brain. But when it comes to something like qualia, what does it feel like? I'm not sure where I stand on that, because I don't know why it couldn't just be what the brain does and how our body responds to chemical electrical signals within a very complex neural network. I'm not a scientist in that field, a biologist in that field, so I don't have a way of being able to justify that. It just doesn't seem to me to be something like A's used very strong language of it's impossible, it can't be, there's no explanation, so on and so forth. And I'm not sure what justifies that it can't be that way. Why would it be quote unquote impossible? I don't see that.
Okay. I agree that consciousness emerges from the brain. So you could call it a emergent property. There is a distinction sometimes made between strong and weak emergence, where in weak emergence, it's completely clear how the emergent phenomenon comes to be from the things out of which it emerges. So if you have two bricks and each brick by itself weighs 1 pound, and then you glue them together, and now the composite weighs 2 pounds. Well, it's very clear how the property of weighing 2 pounds came into existence. But in a case of strong emergence, it's not clear how some emergent phenomenon comes into being. So it's not clear right now, at least given the current state of scientific knowledge, how it is that when you get atoms arranged brain-wise, human brain-wise, for instance, that consciousness comes into being. So that would be a case of strong emergence, where you can't just reduce the emergent phenomenon to the things from which it emerges. And that's how I see I think of consciousness as a case of a strongly emergent phenomena. And I'm not saying you disagree with that. I don't know if you would take a position on whether it's weakly or strongly emergent, but I do think it's emergent. Maybe unlike A's, who, if he's a Christian and he thinks that the soul can like survive the death of the body or something, I don't know if that's his view, but if that is his view, that wouldn't be an emergent view where you have to have some material physical substrate from which consciousness emerges. But that is in fact my view, and I don't think right now we can explain how that happens. And I don't know that you would disagree with that, but I just wanted to make that distinction between different types of emergence.
Yeah, that's actually one of the points I wanted to get down with Ace, but our time, because these are really complicated conversations, the time goes so quickly. But that's something that I've got noted for next time is the consciousness, without a brain. Is this something that exists at a fundamental level? Now, I'm pretty sure that I know, because I do know A's. We've had several conversations in the past, mostly on his channel before I started doing my own thing. And he is a Christian and he does believe in God. And so, and he's a dualist, I believe. So he's, God is, I'm pretty sure he's a dualist, but maybe I don't know that for 100%. He may be, he may have a different view about that, but he's a Christian, and the Abrahamic worldview is a dualistic worldview where God is essentially technically outside of creation, although many Christians have conflated this to be God is the essence of goodness and all this other shit that doesn't even make any sense. But so I don't know where A sits on all that, but I do appreciate the input. Robin, you've been so patient and quiet there. You might be sleeping. I don't know, but I'd love to hear your input on what A's had to say about your comments about evolution, because I'm in complete agreement with you. But you're obviously a lot smarter than I am, so maybe you can articulate it better than I could.
Oh, I don't think that. And first, I want to apologize because I have like my notifications for Discord open, like they come through on my computer, and there is like a fight going on in one of my Discord channels right now that does not involve me, but like I'm getting like 100 just like notifications, so you probably hear that noise, and I don't know how to shut it off to make it stop. So I want to say, like, I think that, okay, first, like as a Christian, if he's a Christian, there are plenty of biologists who are Christian, who understand the natural processes that have led to the evolution of things like hunger and stuff like that, and how the fish swim upstream to their, to the place where they were born or whatever. We understand those processes. Like you have to study the different fields to know those specific things. And I'm not an expert in all that stuff. I don't think anybody can be an expert in everything. But I think that I think that A has shown that he fundamentally has a misunderstanding of what biological processes we can explain through the evolution. Like it's amazing. Like you don't have to be a non-Christian or a materialist or a atheist to go and learn how biology can explain these things. And there are lots of Christian biologists who are perfectly fine with these explanations. I wrote down some here. I posted an article from the National Institute of Health, and OE's going to link it, that just shows how hunger evolved, how we can explain it neurological and stuff, the processes of that. And Robert Sapolsky is like my go-to on free will sort of answers. I think Robert has done years and years and years of work in this field, and that's why he is exactly why I'm a determinist. And Dan, thank you for that book. I want to check that out. I'm going to try to check that out. And there was something else I wrote down here, and I can't even see what it says. But yeah, Austin Sims would be good. Austin Sims is great for explaining stuff like this right here. He has a lot better knowledge in it than I do. I kind of can just point towards people like that right there. I do think that A uses very strong language about impossible and stuff. I think that one thing that separates me, like I may be a determinist, or and um, I think methodological naturalism is the process that we use to do science, and I think it is necessary. And methodological naturalism has two sort of different like lines of thought in it. One of them is the actual processes that we use to do science, which kind of excludes any metaphysical, supernatural inventions. But then you can also, there is a side of it that is that um, separates the difference, between saying that nothing else exists, because methodological naturalism not doesn't necessarily say that nothing else exists. It just says that we cannot test it. We cannot, we're not able to test it or measure it, and so we don't use it in our explanations. That's all that says. So it's not necessarily, methodological naturalism doesn't necessarily say that nothing else exists outside the natural world, but that we are not able, as of right now. And if we ever find a way to measure and measure that and test for it, then sure, we would add it to the methodological naturalism process. I don't say that nothing else exists for sure, because I think that fallibility is something that everybody should hold. The ideal that we do not know everything there is to know, and we can always be wrong. And I think that you have to hold that, no matter which position you hold, whether theism, atheism, any position, you should always maintain a level of fallibility. And I think that's just, and Christians could call it humility, I guess. You know what I mean? Like you can call that, but we've always shown that humans are fallible. We are fallible beings. And I think that it's important to remember that. And I think that's all I had to say. I think I could probably go with A for a long time, because I think that he's just fundamental misunderstanding of what we do know. And I think that everybody should, if you question these things, you should study biology. And if you can prove biology wrong, that'd be great, because we're always trying to make sure we're more correct than we were yesterday. Thank you.
Yeah, that's actually the problem that I've run into, not just with A's, but with every creationist and biblical literalist. And Ace is not a biblical literalist, but they're in the same camp. But frankly, anybody with a dogmatic position about anything, whether it's religion or politics or anything else for that matter, is that they claims get made without evidence, and actual evidence seems to get hand waved away. And it's something that can be frustrating if you're trying to, absolutely hammer home a point with somebody. But if you're willing to just engage in a civil conversation and let, the thoughts out into the quote unquote ether or whatever, then it shouldn't be a big deal. But it does happen a lot. I've seen it happen. A's invited me. He was very gracious. When I first had met him, he was talking about evolution being impossible, and I am not a biologist. I know very little about evolution, although I know a lot more than I used to because of people like Austin Sims, Mark Reed are just two names. Gutsick Gibbon is another great resource for anybody who wants to learn about evolution. She's in the process of doing a series of videos where the creationist who says he's open-minded, he wants to learn evolution because he's a creationist. He doesn't think it's true, but he said he'd be willing to go through basically a course on evolution. And Gutsick Gibbon volunteered her time to explain evolution from step one at basically a rudimentary level all the way through to the complex. She's really highly educated. I think she's doing a master's program right now in biology, anthropology, perhaps specifically. And so I highly recommend, that's a free course on evolution on YouTube for anybody who would want it. I should pin a link to her channel in the description. In fact, I'll write a note to myself. You know who I'm talking about, right? Guts at Gibbon?
Joel Duff. It's Joel. Yeah, Joel Duff is the
Yes.
the and
Yes.
he is actually the person who took the flat earthers down to Antarctica to see the 24-hour sun to show that the Earth is a globe. He was the one that actually did that. So he has a very open mind, and he's, from what I know, he is like taking this course with her, and he's sharing this with his children and everything. So his entire family is taking this course too, and I feel like that. From what I've seen of Joel so far, I'm thinking that he will come out and accept evolution. Like, if he's, because he seems to have intellectual honesty, and so I think that he just maybe never did learn evolution. I wasn't taught evolution in school. I was 50 years old before I learned it, so I'm still like always catching up on stuff.
There's it's not super complex at the basic level, but once you start getting into the actual science behind it, it gets really deep, obviously. You know what I mean? You talk about genetics and DNA and all this other crazy stuff. But at a very basic level, I was able to explain to A's in our conversation, it basically comes down to natural selection, hereditary traits, you know what I mean? And things of this nature. There's one other, which I can't even think of what it's called now, but when you have a dysfunction, what is it called? A mutation, right? So you get this is basically environmental pressure. This is what the basic description of what drives the evolutionary process at the very basic level. And Ace really was pushing back, and he'd studied more of it than I had, I could tell. And so I said, I try to be honest all the time, frankly, in life. I value honesty. And I try to be intellectually honest. I said, Ace, I'm not really qualified to defend. I believe evolution because I follow the scientific consensus, because as an engineer myself, I understand that a lot of hard work goes into being an expert in any particular field, a scientific field, including mathematics, physics, and so on and so forth. So I said, so I do believe in evolution, but I'll be honest, I can't explain it to somebody. So I need to, would you be open to having some people who know what they're talking about come onto your channel? And he said, yeah. So I invited some people from Discord. One of them was, in fact, a professor who in biology. And in fact, that's where I met Johnny B. Animations, who does my Failed Prophecy series. That's when I met him. But anyway, so this Johnny B. and this biology professor went onto A's channel, and the professor was able to bring up peer-reviewed papers and resources, citations for every claim that he made. And A's just hand-waved it away. He literally just hand-waved it away. And then A's brought his own arguments. He said, well, I have papers that can refute, single-celled organisms, evolving to multi-cell organisms, all this stuff. So the biologist is like, well, can you show me those papers? And so when A's brought his own resources, he was going off of the abstract only, not actually getting into the meat of what the papers are saying. And the biologist who came with me, he said, wait a minute, this paper doesn't actually say what you're telling me it says. He says, you're just reading the abstract. He says, click on that button right there, and it brings up the actual paper. And once Ace did that, it completely refuted what he was saying. And it happened like 2 or 3 different times. And that's the only time I've seen Ace have a serious conversation with somebody who knew what they're talking about. And even after all that, Ace was completely convinced that evolution was false. So I'm not sure at that point and this is why I don't believe that we can, one of the many reasons why I don't believe we really can control what we believe, which is another thing I want to talk to A's about, because that was one of my closing remarks from last conversation, is relating this to free will. If we can't control what we're convinced of, right? And I think we can do simple experiments to prove that we cannot control what we're convinced of. We can control to a certain degree what we're exposing ourselves to. But the goal, if you're looking to be correct and you're looking for truth, is to expose yourself to as much information as possible and hope that the abundance of truthful information will convince you, evidence will convince you, things of this nature. And we do find evidence to be very convincing, which is why the scientific method continues to chip away at mythological and superstitious beliefs all the time, right? We're constantly getting superstitions and mythology, which I throw religion into those categories, is constantly being chipped away at by science. We never see it happen the other way around. We never see a scientific theory be debunked by a religious claim. It's never happened, and it's never going to happen. It always happens the other way around. So religious people just double down on their claims, but they cannot replace any functional scientific theory with a religious claim. We replace scientific theories all the time with new scientific theories. As science, like Robin said, we need to be humble and understand that science is an open platform. And one of the issues that I see with A's and other people is they have this idea that there's a conspiracy somehow being run by some mysterious organization that's apparently probably run by the devil or something of this nature. I'm not trying to be sarcastic. That's literally how people define it to me, as crazy as it sounds to somebody who doesn't believe in these things. And that the devil's controlling evolution, and that people who hate God are controlling evolution and stuff. And I've refuted that so many times with people by citing actual statistics that most scientists are actually religious people. It's not atheists who are doing this. It's actually people who claim to believe in some type of a God or theism or whatever that are actually recognizing scientific truth. So the conspiracy theory doesn't hold any water. Who's running the conspiracy? What's the benefit of it? Because if we find that 93% of the people on the planet are religious, the benefit would be to promote religion, not to debunk it. You know what I mean? If people are so susceptible to it and gullible to it, promoting it, which is what societies have done and governments continue to do. We've never had an atheist president in the US. We had one agnostic, from my understanding. And again, Robin, you know more about history than I do when it comes to this kind of stuff. But my understanding is we've never had an atheist president, for example. I don't know if we ever, well, I don't want to say ever, but it's going to be a long time before an open atheist will run for presidency, probably. So
yeah, we've never had a openly admitting president that was an atheist. Right. I would argue that there's a very good there's a very good likelihood that we have had more than one, but they were not openly admitting, which until our common time right now, our common era, openly admitting you're atheist was like fundamentally, first of all,
political suicide.
Yes. Plus it was dangerous. There was a time when it was also dangerous for your health. But I would say that even Thomas Jefferson and some of those, John Adams, who didn't claim to be atheists but considered themselves theists. I would say that Thomas Jefferson actually probably was an atheist. I have a lot of his writings and stuff, and I do think that he was an atheist. He definitely was not a Christian. He was more in line with, but and this is what I point out too, is Darwin had not explained evolution by natural selection yet. By the time that those presidents, our early presidents, served. And so it is very, it makes a lot of sense that they were not able to accept just a no God, no kind of, that it's understandable because they still didn't know how natural processes could explain the biological, life on Earth.
That's another claim that they make. You bring up Darwin, and I want to open up. I want to make sure Chris and Dan, you guys at this point, everyone's welcome to join the conversation. I know, Chris, you unmuted yourself a couple times. You have something to say. I'll just say real quickly that I've heard that claim too. Darwin hated God and wanted to disprove, creationism, and that wasn't the case at all. Darwin was actually a Christian when he was studying evolution. So yes. It was, these claims get made without any substance to them. And then people will latch onto them because they have to have this nefarious motive, because otherwise there's no explanation for why they can't accept the reality that the evidence speaks for itself. They have to import something else. So go ahead, you guys, feel free to open up the floor. It's whatever you guys want to talk about.
We'll let Chris go, or Dan.
I don't know.
I probably need to head out soon, but I can stick around a little bit and just listen at least. I'll pipe up if I have anything I really want to say.
Okay, sounds good. And if the conversation winds down, I always do try to give everybody a last word. And if they have a YouTube channel, to promote their own content and their own channels and stuff like that. So you guys make sure before you leave, let me know, and I'll give you the floor for a minute, and you can promote your own stuff. I'm happy to network with everybody and everybody, I think you guys do a great job with your channels, Robin and Dan. Both. I really enjoyed interacting with you guys. So before you don't just leave, let me give you a chance to promote your stuff too.
All right. Well, I guess I'll take my leave now, and just say thanks again for letting us on and having this discussion. I appreciate the opportunity, and I am probably going to do a live stream myself right after this. I was thinking about doing a simulcast at the same time, and maybe having part of this live stream of Objective Ethics on my own live stream, but I wasn't ready to set that up. So, but I am planning to do a live stream very shortly, maybe within an hour. So if anyone wants to come by my channel, check it out. I'm at YouTube, at Dan Norton 1 on YouTube. And I talk a lot about Ayn Rand's philosophy of objectivism, a philosophy of reason, egoism, and capitalism. And happy to entertain discussion over there. I also take calls. It's a somewhat different format. It's not like a main guest followed by an open panel. It's pretty much anytime anyone wants to call in, they're welcome to. And I also engage with the chat. So feel free to come by. Thanks again for having me here.
Dan, I always enjoy stopping by. I have a couple things to do. The wife is going to probably want some attention too. So I don't know how much time I'll be able to spend on your show, but I will at least put it on in the background or something, give you a thumbs up and help you with the algorithm. Thank you so much for stopping by.
Dan post that in private chat, his channel, or no, because I know he can't post in the other chat.
Oh yeah, Dan, I always put a link to the people who come on here. I put a link to their channels in the description of the video. So I will do that as soon as this posts, Robin. But if you want to get it sooner than that, Dan, if you want to put it in the private chat, I'll put it here in the regular chat.
Yeah, it's just you. I'll say it, but I'll also put it in the private chat. YouTube.com/@Dan Norton1. or you can just search my name on YouTube, Dan Norton, Ayn Rand. I'm sure you'll find my channel easily that way.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Now, Chris, Robin, did you guys want to have any final thoughts? Or I know, Chris, you don't have a YouTube channel. Why don't I let you have your final thought, and then we'll let Robin have the final word.
I think I think that the not the social barrier, but the apologetics of the discussion is one of the barriers that what helps us to move forward between the understanding. And I'm not trying to say we convert people. I'm just basically coming to an understanding about how I don't say materialist or physicalist worldview, but it's just that the theological disconnect. Well, sorry, not theological, but the disconnect that due to the theology and the need for it to reign supreme is one of those things that we can't exactly because we're basically at an impasse because of this. But that's just my 2 cents on it. And thanks for having me on Objective. So yeah, that's all I got to say.
Yeah, I always appreciate when you stop by, Chris. Thank you so much for supporting the channel, and thank you for setting a good example for people of how to maintain your composure and your own self-respect while still offering intelligent pushback and criticisms of ideas that are being pushed. And that goes for my own ideas too. It's not just A's. I really like A's a lot, and I do have a lot of agreement with A's when it comes to certain claims. I see the contradictions between Paul and Jesus, for example, and A's totally accepts that. I see the complications with the Trinity, for example, logical implications that it violates the laws of logic, and A's agrees with the Trinity being a problem. So we have a lot of agreement. We also agree on respect, right? We've treated each other and will continue to treat each other with respect in our conversations. So, I want to make it clear that I do appreciate A's as a human being, even though we have fundamental disagreements on things. So, Robin, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you. Introduce your channel. Make sure people can find you. I don't know if you want to put a link to that in the private chat. I can post it here, but I'm also going to put a link to that in the description of the video. Once I post this, I'll go back in and edit that stuff in.
Okay, it's just Robin Webster is my channel, and you'll see this icon here, right here. Um, so you should be able to come up. I'm trying to get into debates. I mostly debate. I like to debate like the founding of the United States and historical things with our, you know, our past as a country, and like Christian nationalism and stuff like that. So that's my main topic. But I have debated a few other things. I do understand quite a bit about evolution, although I'm not a biologist, and I didn't start till I was 50 years old, so I'm a little behind on it. But I'm cramming for it as much as possible. And I'm going to start having a weekly show. I still don't know what actually the subject's going to be. I'm kind of hoping anybody that would stop by and leave me some sort of comment on what kind of show they would like to have once a week and what would be a good time to have a hangout like. So I'm hoping you'll do that, OE, so I can get you in there too, so you can be there.
Oh, I'd love to. Yeah, anything I can do to support your efforts, Robin, I'm more than happy to, and I'll promote that as well. You just give me whatever details you want, and I'll be sure to spread the word. I'm nobody on the internet and in this space, to be honest with you. You know, I'm shocked that my channel has grown as fast as it has. I guess I should. I always forget to do this. People don't know who the hell's talking right now. I love that picture, by the way. You look like a total boss in that. That's
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, that was like I had Chat GBT draw me up like a debater, like a woman debater, and then I like put my picture in Chat GBT, and it came up with that. So
there's so much cool resources out there. Deconverted Man, for a lot of people who don't know, he actually wrote the outro song that I use for this show. Deconverted Man is the one that came up with that. I thought it was so hilarious when he sent it to me. I never asked him to do it. He just did it out of the kindness of his own heart. And so I was flattered and moved by that. So I decided to incorporate it into the show. And I think he did it with some kind of AI or something like that. But I should take advantage of all these resources, all this technology. I just don't have time away from the real world to fucking get into all that. So I can barely function just getting this stream up, to be honest with you. It's embarrassing.
Well, I got Chat GBT, like everybody has it, and I kept looking at it, and I ordered one for $8 a month, I think is all I got to pay, and it generates like images, and it's pretty handy. I'm just now getting used to it myself. So I'm still pretty bad at running like StreamYard like last night. I'm not very good at this part of it. So,
well, you get. I think I'm under the impression you have a little bit more time on your hands than I do. I'm still working a lot more hours than I really intended to. You know, I was essentially partly retired a few years ago, and then I had some serious medical problems for a couple of years. I mean, serious medical problems. I spent a lot of money out of my retirement, so now I'm back to work, just putting some money back in the old nest egg. And then I agreed to take a promotion, which I don't need, because the owner, he had some family issues come up where he needs to take care of his mother and father stuff. So I said, yeah, I'll run the place while you're gone. And now I'm in, yeah, it is what it is. But yeah, my time is limited. I mean, money's good. I shouldn't complain about money. At least I'm getting compensated for all this, you know, whereas YouTube is just something I enjoy doing. I'm not looking to be a YouTuber, quote unquote, but I have enjoyed interacting with the community. I'll go ahead and I guess I'll let you see yourself out. I'm going to do some kind of a closing statement here. And one thing I do want to mention to people, I don't know how many people are still left watching this. I came up with an intro, speaking of trying to get with the program and make things a little bit more professional. I don't know if you guys caught the beginning of this show, but I'd be curious about your feedback for if you like the intro, or if you want me to do something different with it, or if it's just ridiculous. I got a thick skin, so you can, be honest with me. If you don't like it or whatever, that's perfectly fine. I might make some adjustments, but I do want to just take a quick moment and remind people that next week is going to be a really big show. I've got Tristan Gabriel coming, and I'm really excited about that. For those who don't know who he is, I'll put a link to his channel in the description of this video. It's 21st Century Minds. He does a really good job with his stuff, and I'm really looking forward to having him as a guest next week. The following week is hopefully going to be Austin Sims. And now he's really busy. As you guys know, he's a student. I think he's a double major, biology, evolutionary biology, or just biology. I'm not sure how that goes. And then physics, if I understood that correctly. And he's got a family and work and stuff like that. So I really appreciate him taking time out of his schedule. So that's in 2 weeks from now. Austin Sims will be coming on. We will be discussing evolution, and I really hope that any of the creationists who do check into my channel will stop by and ask Austin your toughest questions. Bring whatever, citations and peer-reviewed papers, because Austin Sims will be ready for you. He's gonna put on a good show, and we'll be discussing evolution. I think if that leaves one Sunday open for the end of the month, I may do a show addressing some of the really bad apologetic arguments I've gotten to some of the videos I've posted. I recently did a video called Christians Want Children to Suffer. I discovered there's a trilemma when it comes to the the claims that Jesus makes in the Bible. Whatever you pray for, if you have enough faith, the faith of a mustard seed, which isn't much, if you know how that analogy works in the Bible, that's basically the smallest seed, they claim, which of course they get a lot of stuff scientifically wrong. This mustard seed is not actually the smallest seed, but they think it is. And so if that's all the faith you need to get whatever you pray for, then there's absolutely no reason that there should be any child suffering going on. But what we find is that there's a lot of children suffering. And I articulate that in the video. So you get a trilemma. Either one, Jesus was wrong. Either two, Christians don't have enough faith when they pray. And that covers every Christian in the entire history of Christianity. Or three, every single Christian that's ever been around just simply doesn't want to end child suffering, so they don't pray for it. Those are the only three logical possibilities based on what Jesus says in the Bible. Now, I've got a lot of really bad apologetic responses on Discord. The Christians are afraid to come into the actual video and leave their comments because they know that they're probably going to get filleted. These are bad hermeneutics, and their hermeneutics actually contradict what Jesus is saying. But you know how it goes. They just explain all that away. So I may do a video addressing some of that. I've also got plans to do a video debunking the flood myth. I know that's been done 1,000 times, but as an engineer myself, someone who builds boats, I have a particular skill set that I'm going to attack Noah's Ark claim, as well as cite some of the scientific stuff regarding geology and stratic layers, fossil records, the fact that there just isn't enough, meteorology, just not enough water on the planet to flood the earth up to the top of the mountain, the highest mountains, so on and so forth. So we'll get into, at some point, do a video on that. I do have a debate that's on the books. I've not done debates before. I've done my own debates, been involved in them, but I haven't actually hosted a debate. I will be hosting one in April. I think it's scheduled for the 25th, between our guest tonight, A's Philosophy, and another gentleman who's been on my channel, Nathaniel, who's a Catholic. Roman Catholic, I believe, and they're going to be debating Paul, whether Paul contradicts Jesus or not. So that should be a fun one between two believers, two theists. And I'll be modding that debate. It'll be hosting it and modding it. So that'll be something a little bit different than what I've done before. The first Sunday of every month, we do our Failed Prophecy series with Johnny B Animations. And I think that's about all I've got scheduled that I could think of. I'm really pleased with the growth of the channel. As I always mention, I'm pleasantly surprised. We're coming up on, I think, 200 subs already, which is very fast growth for people who know about the YouTube space, especially considering the fact that I don't do any real promoting and I don't have time to be doing much more than the one video a week with the one live stream. So all that growth is because you guys are supporting the channel and sharing, spreading the word, sharing the videos, whatever. I don't know anything about the fucking algorithm, but if you guys are hitting the like button or commenting, that probably helps. And I'm really grateful for all that support. What we are trying to build here is a community of people who have different views and are willing to have respectful disagreements and respectful conversations and share these views with each other, because I do promote diversity. I don't want to get rid of diversity. I don't want to get rid of necessarily religion per se. I don't want to get rid of things that I disagree with. What I want to do is to find common ground, to try and figure out how we can support humanity and support diversity and all learn to get along. Maybe somewhere along the way, we can figure out that it's not a good idea to keep these wars going, dropping bombs on other countries. And maybe we can try to end hunger. I mean, we have the resources and the intelligence the scientific understanding to solve so many of the world problems, and we're just not fucking doing it. And we are the solution. We have the power to solve these problems. We are the solution. We just have to make the decision to do that. And that starts with us having self-respect and understanding that in order to have self-respect, we have to respect each other, right? Equally. So I think that's enough preaching for me. And I just appreciate you guys stopping by as always. Thank you so much.
Channel 3.30 for repeating, of course. That's better than I've done before. And Deacon Brennan, what do you do? Wait, objective ethics will be on your plate.